Welcome to Sit and See. I'm Dr. Jared Jones. My research specialties are ancient systems of meditation, the cognitive science of meditation, Buddhist philosophy, and the philosophy of science. I've been a Buddhist for about 20 years, and a Buddhist and a Taoist for another 6, overlapping with those years. I'm on a bit of a mission to help people from all backgrounds, all faiths, secular or religious, understand meditation and be able to do it in the real world if we can. Throughout the course of my life, I've spent a fair amount of time both studying meditation at an academic level to understand what meditation is, how it works, etc., and personally training in meditation to actually see what the full range of possibilities is, from the most basic kinds of secular practice, let's say, all the way up to the weirdest things I could find. Not including things like drugs and so forth, but some of the more rarefied kinds of practices that you find in various lineages of full on spiritual practice coming through Buddhism and Taoism. And so what I've done, for what it's worth, I don't have my normal mug today. Sorry, fans. For what it's worth, I've done my best to put 5 techniques together in a particular order that is coalescing all of the different streams of things that I know into one stream of teachings that hopefully, with a bit of luck, as has been the case with a number of my students, if you happen to stumble across this, will be very, very beneficial to your meditation practice in real life. Hello, Oats. Welcome. Welcome. Sweet and Sour, welcome. Looks like you're the only 2 here at the moment. As per the usual, if you two have questions or anyone else who happens to stumble in the next 30 seconds to hear this, place your questions in the chat and I'll answer them right up until about 9 o'clock, and then we'll do a bit of practice. And until then, I will either ramble or questions will come in. So, what I found is often missing in, let's call it, the meditative smorgasbord of stuff that's available. Hey, Wombat, welcome. What I found is that amongst the hundreds and hundreds of techniques that are out there that are labeled meditation in the modern world, very few of them have the necessary ingredients in the right order to give you access to what meditation, according to these great systems like Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, Buddhism, Taoism, etc. What is it? What these systems promise that meditation can provide? The active ingredients, so to speak, of those medications for the mind, the mental medications that we can apply. Hopefully, don't stretch the analogy too far. um, are not there. So the active ingredients aren't there. And as the great saints say, if you milk a cow's horn for 1,000 years with great determination, you're not going to get even a single drop of milk. Which is why some of you who stumble across this will find that you've meditated for years and basically your mind is maybe slightly better, but not very much different than it was when you got started. And the reason for this is that very likely, if that's what's happened to you, the active ingredients of meditation weren't present. Um, and I'd like to change that. I'd like to, for my part, as best I can, try to make sure that everyone has a set of tools that will really work in the real world to advance your practice. And then when you go to intense retreat, that you'll have a suite of skills that allow you to maintain the benefits of retreat in real life. So that brings us to Sit and See, a class where I answer questions about meditation in general and people's personal practice. And then we do some of the practices that I teach. Now, having said that, for those of you who are relatively new to what it is I do, um, I would say this. Some of what I teach will seem very familiar to you, and some of it will seem very unusual to you because much of what is taught as meditation in modern terms, radically miscommunicates what the process of training in meditation is going to be like. And since it's doing this, mm, the ideas that people have about what it should be like and what the steps and stages are, and are just flat wrong, unfortunately. And because of this, people start meditating, and then the things, if you get a little bit of a taste, the things that automatically come up, if you get some taste of meditation, they start coming up, and then people are really confused. Like, I'll give you a great example. One of the things that happens if you get a real taste of meditation for the first time is that your mind seems worse than it's ever been. It seems like you have more negative emotions than ever. It seems like you have more intense and loud thoughts than ever. It seems like you are worse internally than you have ever been in your entire life. And that sounds like the opposite of meditation, right? It sounds like somehow you've gone backwards in a big way. But in meditation, you're building up two capabilities primarily. One is called, I'm going to avoid the popular term, and I'm going to call it non forgetfulness. So the first one is that you can remember what you intended to do, both in terms of the instructions for how to do something that are coming from long term memory and the active act of whatever it is you're trying to do. You don't forget what you intended to do. And therefore, you can carry on in some kind of focused way on what you're doing. The other aspect is called, mm, I like the term vigilance for translating this term, that you become intensely aware of the content of your mind and the quality of your mind. Now, why is it that for the first time in your life, you're looking at your mind after training your mind for a little bit and you go, my mind is worse than ever. I have more negative emotions than ever. My thoughts are more out of control than ever. Because that, my friends, because that's how it's always been. It's always been like this. Your mind has always been a mess. Welcome, Jay. By the standards provided, to be clear, by the standards provided by meditative texts, your mind has always been a mess. And one of the first things that should happen, and in fact, the conversation that I usually have with new students within a 1 month period or so, is they say, it seems like my mind is worse than ever. And I go, great. Well done. Totally counterintuitive, right? The other thing is, meditation in the beginning is not relaxing at all. It's incredibly demanding, takes a lot of energy, unless you're doing it in retreat, and then you can sort of just not stir your mind up for 3 or 4 days, and it'll settle down. But if you want to make progress in real life, where your mind is already stirred up, and where you're going to stir it up between sessions every single day, you have to use techniques that aren't relaxing at all. They're the opposite of relaxing. And in fact, when you look at the cognitive literature, for lack of a better term, provided by the Buddhist classics, they say that effort, the mental factor of effort, the aspect where your mind has to be deliberately, intentionally, with great force, or some force, basically, doing something on purpose, that doesn't go away until you hit advanced meditation. You have to be a pretty advanced practitioner, where basically you set your mind on a meditative object and it's immediately in a perfect state of concentration, and that you could remain there for at least 3 or 4 hours without, as easily as breathing, and then effort goes away. But if that's not you, effort will be there, which means it's not relaxing. Now, where does the relaxation come from, even in the midst of effort? It comes from the fact that your mind will settle down. But now here's another problem, and I hear this all the time. I was talking to a really sincere uh, Sikh Sikh practitioner who's done a lot of work with mantra. Actually, a couple of them done a lot of work with mantra, and very sincerely wants to use this mantra practice from the Sikh tradition to make progress, as is described in some of their texts, some of their commentaries. And was finding that after doing a fair amount of this, that their mind was less sharp than when they started this practice. That their mind was foggy, their thoughts were foggy. They didn't know why this was happening. And once again, totally counterintuitive. But if you are trying to train your mind in concentration and you have a little bit of success at the first four stages are about having less and less distraction. Is as you get further along in these four stages until there's basically no obvious distraction in the meditative session, this other thing starts to build up where part of your mind gets distracted by the fact that the mind is calm. And as you can think about it again, I use the analogy of bandwidth quite often. You can think about it like internet bandwidth. When Comcast or whoever, right, your internet provider cuts your internet service down, and then you're watching a movie or something, and the screen goes from like beautiful HD picture to 1980s pixelated horror film, right? So likewise, in the beginning, your concentration on the mantra that you're reciting mentally, for example, might be very crisp. But if you sit there and do it for an hour, part of your attention gets distracted by the fact that the mind is now calm and the object that was, or the mind that was previously observing the object with great intensity and brightness and lucidity, analogized by my hand here, becomes sort of like this. And because of this, your cognitive engagement with the object, the brightness with which you're seeing the object or experiencing the object, becomes sort of dull and hazy. And if the great classics say, if you spend a lot of time in this dull, cognitively hazy state of mind, you can get depressed. You can have a mind that's, you lose your discernment so that you have difficulty remembering things and you have difficulty discerning the differences, the fine differences between things. In other words, you'll make yourself stupider and you'll make yourself depressed and sad because you're practicing a sad, depressed, stupid state of mind. And this is a big problem. Like, if you really want to train in meditation, you have to do serious work to overcome this problem. Because as the mind gets more calm, it will experience what's called laxity, where it gets distracted by the calmness. And if you just let the mind sink into that feeling of being calm without without keeping the attention on the object with bright, lucid awareness, then you'll get sad, you'll get depressed, and you'll get more stupid, and you won't have motivation to do things. The mind will become sort of dull. So this is a big problem, right? Again, very counterintuitive because people think, oh, the whole point of meditation is to make the mind calm. So if I'm just sitting there with a sort of dull, calm, it's very relaxing to rest in a state of dullness. And you're sitting there and the mind's just sort of peaceful and you're kind of whatever. It's very relaxing. Isn't that meditation? No, that's dullness, and it'll make you stupider and unhappier. Again, it's very counterintuitive because popular culture says calmness and relaxation is meditation, and would also tell you, well, if you're putting too much effort in, that can't be meditation because effort is somehow not meditation. Well, according to the classics, you need a huge amount of effort to stop all the meditative faults from coming up that will lead your mind to being worse than it was in the first place. So, since there are no questions, I decided to ramble on about this idea. For whoever happens to stumble upon this video at a later time, it's important to note that actual training in meditation is probably quite different than you imagined it to be before you encountered all of this. And the first stage of real training in meditation, one of the signs is that your mind seems worse than it's ever been in your life. Very counterintuitive. And then another sign when you start getting some concentration is that all of a sudden you start feeling sadder and you start feeling stupider and you start feeling like your mind is hazy because you're starting to transition from the main problem being distraction to the main problem being laxity. Again, very counterintuitive. And so at anywhere along that spectrum, this is usually where people quit because they go, well, this meditation things, this is for the birds, man. It either makes you like feel totally insane or it makes you feel depressed and stupid, right? Which is actually a logical conclusion. Like if you didn't know any better, you know, if you're a reasonably intelligent person, you would go, this really isn't doing anything that's beneficial here. And so I think people very reasonably quit under those circumstances. Thankfully, that's not what meditation is, and that's not the end of the road. And if you know what the whole flow chart of training looks like, then there are things you can do to adjust the mind, adjust the process until you're dealing with subtler and subtler problems, and ultimately those problems begin to resolve, and you're getting closer and closer to a refined state of concentration. And finally, it is really enjoyable. Not that that's the point, but a lot of people think the enjoyment is the point, right? So if you want that, you have to put in the effort, and the effort is is a continuous thing during each session, especially in the early days. And the early days might be for like the first decade, not the first month. And then everyone left the stream for some reason. Oh, okay. Right, my friends. Well, hopefully there was some useful nuggets in there that were worth hearing. What else is on my mind? Um, a few people have also wondered and inquired and pointed out at various stages, now that I've been much more public about all of this for the last couple of months. There's been some people have sort of had these revelations. They're exactly the ones I hoped they would have, training in the techniques that I teach, because there are two different ways you can approach, for example, the problems I was just discussing. I don't quite have the words of eternal life, but you know, as I've said before, I'm not the mother or father. The mother or father is in the lineage, in the main lineage you're training in. No words of eternal life. Who is that? Is that like Monty Python or something? I can't remember. Uh, do our minds want what's best for us? I think deep down, our minds do want what's best for us, but that desire has to be linked to what actually works. Because our minds, the reason we're stuck in out of control rebirth is that our minds have been chasing, since beginningless time, things we think will lead to happiness that don't lead to happiness, right? Tanha. We crave these sources of supposed sources of happiness, and we chase those. And uh, because of chasing these things that don't lead to happiness, we waste entire lifetimes, and we accumulate karma that propels us to do it again. And that process has no beginning, according to Buddhism. Not that it's like mysterious in that, well, it sort of came out of nowhere. No, no, no. Beginninglessness means it's an infinite causal sequence. There has never been a time we weren't doing that. And as we were discussing last night, for those of you who were here, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, but the odds of us ending up here with the opportunity to get out are basically impossible. It's virtually impossible that we would end up here with this opportunity. It's basically, it shouldn't have happened, and it did, and now we're here. I mean, it's remarkable. Oh, yeah, I didn't get that one, Jay. My apologies. Right. So just a about uh quick chat then about why I've put the things in the order that I have. I know I've given this chat before, but some new people may come along, and maybe some of you, this things will click when I say it. I'm gonna do well, we're almost at 9, but I'll do maybe a 5-minute mini version of this. According to the great Indian classics that were then commented on by later Indian practitioners in the in the sort of high Indian Buddhist tradition, let's call it, and then also commented on by the Tibetans because they inherited the high Indian Buddhist tradition, as well as a couple of other ones. The main problem you have at the very earliest stages is that your mind gets distracted. And there's a couple of different classifications of distraction. One of them is sort of the main problem, but you don't really have to worry about that actually. If you just place great force to meet the force of distraction, you will deal with the main one and begin dealing with the secondary one. So the first technique I teach, you place your attention on the breath with great force for a short period of time, high intensity, short duration, because the main problem you have is that you can't keep your mind where you want it. And if you try to do that for 30 minutes, your effort will go like this over time, which means that you'll be sitting there and the distractions will be coming back like this because they're in an inverse relationship, right? And after 30 minutes, there's very little effort and the distractions are full blown, but you have no vigilance. You have no ability to detect the contents of your own mind, and therefore you don't even notice that this has happened. And so spending all of that extra time sitting there in distraction isn't beneficial to you. It's actually counter to your training. The thing to do, hey Hans, welcome. The thing to do is when it's like this, right? When the effort's extremely high and therefore you can do a huge amount against the distractions, spend 5 minutes like this and then take a break. And then 5 minutes later come back, full effort for 5 minutes, we're doing battle with the distractions, and then you take a break, right? Come back a few minutes later, 5 minutes like this. But if you sit there for 30 minutes, this is distraction. This is your ability to deal with distraction through great effort. It goes like this until the distractions are great. Your mind is getting tired, by the way, so you have less introspection than normal, and you're sitting there for 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour with distractions coming back, your mind running around, and you don't even notice. So this is according to the great masters, not just me. This is like a huge waste of time and actually contrary to your training. It's actually hurts your training. It doesn't like add more to do more just to do more. What adds more is doing more correctly, doing more effectively. Does this make sense? If you think about it from a martial arts perspective, which is why I encourage everyone to have a martial art or yoga or music or like something that you do as a hobby and you know, hopefully also something to keep you in relatively functional order as you get older, this sort of thing, like something well anyways, I've talked a lot about Lohan stuff over the last few weeks, so I won't do that again for now. um if you have some other training discipline, you know that if you did like 100 of repetitions of something and you did them all really shitty, you haven't practiced that thing just by doing 100 of them. You have to practice like 10 of them as well as you can do them. And adding on another 90 that isn't actually doing them because you're too tired or whatever doesn't add anything to the original 10. And as a matter of fact, now you're practicing something that isn't the thing. This is really obvious if you play music. Imagine if, when your fingers got tired playing guitar or violin or something, that you just kept playing when it was like absolutely ear shatteringly terrible sound. How could that possibly lead to you having great skill? You know, you need to take a break and come back when the fingers are working and do it perfectly as best you can, right? That's how you make progress. Quality training, not quantity of training. So the first stage is 5 minutes intensive breath meditation where you're just dealing with distraction with a great deal of force and intensity. And then you take a short break and you come back and again deal with distraction with a great deal of intensity before it goes like this. And you're just sitting there with iron will to sit for longer, right? With distractions now running the show. That's not helping. It's helping to develop your willpower. It's not helping you to develop meditation power. Right? So this is when somebody asked yesterday. I don't like to tell people who said what and when because I don't want to put your business out there unless you want to put it out there. But somebody said yesterday, why are we sitting so long with some schools and blah blah blah? And I said, because sometimes they're not training you in meditation by making you sit a long time. Sometimes they're training you in willpower. Sometimes they're training your character to be the type of character you need to succeed in the system as a whole in the long run. So sometimes they're training you in things that aren't the thing you think you're training in at the time. Because if you're sitting there with loads of distraction, but you have an iron will and you're willing to just sit through stuff that isn't doing anything, basically, later, through your iron will and determination, with the right techniques at the right time, blah, 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 you can make progress. So that's one way of doing it. And you see that a lot, I think, in my humble view. You see that a fair amount in the Theravada schools. I've seen that kind of thing a fair amount in schools that come through the Theravada lineage, where they basically start you out, and on day one you're doing an hour of meditation. You know, you can't do 2 minutes of meditation, but they're going to sit you down for an hour anyway. Okay, so how do you do more? You do more when doing more is doing more. So the second technique that I teach in my system is body scanning meditation. And quite often, if you're doing body scanning, especially if you're standing up, where the body scanning won't put you to sleep, because sleep will start coming. Sleep is the result of laxity or dullness, like we were talking about before. Sleep is the ultimate result of laxity or dullness. It'll lead there in the beginning, in particular. So how do you know it's time to add more? Well, if you add more organically based upon how much you can actually do, probably within if you're working at it pretty hard, like within a couple months, you can start sitting for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour at a time. You could do that a couple times a day if you wanted. But you should build it up based upon the quality increasing with the quantity, not just to do more, but because the actual quality is now good for an hour. Simply doing more to do more uh, isn't adding anything and is likely slowing down the process, for what it's worth. Okay. On that cheery note, the alternative to just brute forcing it using one technique and trying to learn how to do everything in meditation that there is to do in one technique is to change techniques to techniques that fix the problems you have as you go along. So we're going to do some meditation in just like 2 more minutes, but let me land the plane. So intensive breath, distractions, body scanning, even better at dealing with distractions once you can focus your mind a little bit. Then you're going to start dealing with dullness. So, right away, basically, pretty soon, I have you standing so that you're not becoming as dull while you're doing body scanning. Now, you have enough concentration to start looking at the fundamental components that make up your being, which tends to make your mind more lucid while being calm. So then we move from body scanning into types of meditation. One, that you can take on the road, which means you can do more practice in real life. And two, types of meditation that give you access to the fundamental components that make up your being. In other words, your five external senses and your mind. By the time you've made a lot of progress with your five external senses and you have the ability to sort of control what they're doing, more or less, not completely, but you're gaining control of them at least. Now, if you have a lucid mind that's stable most of the time when you're meditating, the problems are now quite subtle and you need more insight into what the main mind is doing to make more progress. So at this point, I turn people's attention inwards towards the main mind. And if you're living in the real world, finally, the problems you're going to be dealing with, when you get to when you get out of your meditation, or that your even if you train a lot in concentration, your mind is still going to have problems in terms of whatever they are, anger, attachment, blah blah blah, in real life. And so rumination meditation is the final piece, which is learning how to change the attitudes, motivations, worldview, intentions, etc., that are on the surface of your mind, so that your mind isn't just being dragged around when you're not meditating to a bunch of stuff it shouldn't be doing. That naturally now your emotions, your worldview, your intent, etc., is headed the same way as the meditating mind when you're on your cushion. Everything increasingly is heading the same direction down the path instead of having to fight with your emotions, right? Not that you're going to become perfect like next Tuesday or something, or not that you're going to be perfect in 20 years, even. I'm not perfect. But as they say in America, it is a more perfect union, right? It's not a perfect union of 50 states. It is a more perfect union, that it is headed towards the best we can do in terms of perfection. Okay. Toward the latter end of a long session, I generally still have my object, but it does become harder, and attention may just modulate up and down. Yeah. Um, we can talk about that more, sort of one on one, Jay. Um, because also you're doing a lot of practice and you're doing a fair amount of retreat at the moment, and so your mind may be doing a bit better than what I'm describing in general terms. So I don't want to discourage you from what you're doing. From my system, what do I use body scanning for? Mainly, we'll do some body scanning today. Mainly, I'm using body scanning after you have enough attention to place your mind somewhere. The first thing I'm using body scanning to do is to take all of these distractions on the first four stages of meditation and maybe get you from like stage 2 of concentrative ability to stage 3 or 4, which maybe doesn't mean a lot to you, but yeah, yeah. Like if you're doing a fair amount of retreat, your mind will behave itself a little bit better than the normal person's. So again, take some of what I'm saying for you, Jay, personally, as with a grain of salt. Um, in terms of this last stage of dealing with coarse distraction, obvious distraction, you have to look at, how do I say? Um, sorry, body scanning is a really excellent technique for this. Body scanning is a great technique for dealing with distraction and getting the mind to be very, very calm. And it's not just working with your mind, it's working with your body. You actually calm down your body and your nervous system. And because of that, the effects last longer than if you were just working on your mind only. And then in addition to that, it's a bridging technique that will eventually allow you to do things like 5 points meditation, 6 directions meditation, full body meditation, which are techniques you can take out into the world. Intense breath meditation, you can't take into the world. Yeah, I consider body scanning to be, well, I mean, it's kind of an analytic meditation, but because of what it does to your body, it ends up creating concentration. And then, in addition to that, if your mind is legitimately going from location to location without getting distracted, even though the object is changing, each aspect has concentration at the time, right? And each change is deliberate. So you're building concentration even though the object is changing. The mind is concentrated at all times, which actually makes it easier for beginners too, right? Because staying with one object is boring and difficult. Changing objects over and over again, it stays interesting, which can keep the mind fresh also. Okay, let's do some practice. Otherwise, the boss will get angry at me. All right. Okay. So we'll do some standing practice. So let's start from let's start from the bottom today, as we usually do. So place the attention in both feet, both ankles, both calves, both knees, both of your lower thighs, upper thighs, the front of your pelvis, the back of your pelvis. Find your tailbone, and your anus, perineum, and your sexual organ. Now move to the back of your waist, the front of your waist, the back of your diaphragm belt, just the middle portion of your torso, and the front of your diaphragm belt, the back of your chest, front of the chest, and let's take our time on the shoulders today. So put the mind into the top of both shoulders, the front of both shoulders, including your collarbones, the side of both shoulders, and the back of both shoulders, including the scapula or shoulder blades, whatever you'd like to call them. Into the armpits, biceps, elbows, forearms, the wrists, palms, and the back of your hands. And then the first joint of each of your knuckles, the second joint, and the third joint, and the fingertips. Now move the awareness to the bottom of your neck, the middle third of your neck, the upper third of your neck, and up to the joint between the neck and the skull. The back of your skull now, left side, right side, right ear, left ear, and your forehead. Left eyebrow, left eye, right eyebrow, right eye, your nose, left cheek. And when I do the cheeks, I include the temples. So your right cheek and temple, then your upper lip area, lower lip area, and the chin. Now your top lip, your bottom lip, the skin inside your mouth, Quickly scan through each one of your teeth. Roof of your mouth, underneath your tongue, and your tongue. Now take your awareness from the tip of the tongue and slide back towards the throat until you arrive at the throat. As gently as you can with enough relative precision, I would say. Try to just move your awareness straight up from the throat through the skull to the top of the head. And then be aware of the top of the head. And relax. Just a small detail on this practice. I recommend when you get done, if there's a lot of sensation in the feet and the legs and so forth, don't shake them out. Do a bit of walking practice. If there's some tingling or a feeling of heat on the feet, that sort of thing, just leave it there, and just walk a bit until they feel more normal. But don't shake it out and try to get rid of it. Okay, very good. So to take a few more minutes to answer the question about stabilizing versus analytic meditation, body scanning it's in a bit of an interesting category because, like I said, if you're placing your awareness with some degree of reduced conceptuality, at least on the various parts of your body, and you're just observing the tactile sensations that are there, that's concentration. And then if you move directly from there to another part and you do it again, that's also concentration, right? And then if you go to another part and you do it again, concentration. And if in between there's not too much conceptual thought going on, and all of the conceptual thought that is going on is aimed at the activity and not forgetting what you intended to do, well, that's non-forgetfulness. And I think even in the Pali Canon, they talk about the first jhana. The first jhana is called, if I'm not mistaken, directed thought. It's an interesting name. Mm, right? So I think there basically, in my way of thinking, I'm training you to do a technique that makes your mind very calm because you're calming down the whole nervous system. There's just tremendous benefits to doing body scanning that go beyond what's listed in the classics. There's a ton of psychological research on this in the cognitive scientific journals. It's just a great practice overall. for your mental health, for the calmness of your nervous system. The benefits last well beyond the actual session, etc. So it's worth doing. And then if you stand the way that I teach, there's also health benefits to learning how to stand that way. And for those of you who are involved in Lohan, uh, the, that way of standing is building the type of body you need to do Chinese internal arts, which is part of the reason that it makes you more healthy, right? It's comes from the Chinese health arts. Also, if you wanted to be able to do standing meditation for an hour or more, you need to know how to stand. And if you're standing just on the bones by standing on your heels or something, that won't be comfortable in the long run. Obviously, if you're standing just on your toes and it's all the muscles are engaged, that's not going to be comfortable either. So you have to learn how to stand roughly sort of in between so that everything is slightly stretched, just barely, gently stretched, and you rest on the white tissue, on that stretchiness, instead of primarily relying on the large muscle groups or the bones. You're using both the muscles and the bones, but a bit you're engaging the stretchy white tissue, which can take a lot of your weight without actually having to exert a huge amount of effort because it's like stretchy connective tissue. It's like rubber bands inside you, right? Right. Okay. So, um, what I'm also training you to do is I'm training you through body scanning in the way that I teach it. I'm training you eventually to do a really detailed analysis, analytic meditation, like analyzing whether or not the self exists in the way that it appears. If you have the ability to go through all the parts that make you up in a reduced conceptual state, and you can analyze each part and see, is the thing that I expected to be there, is it in there or not? Then this is taking you towards your realization of selflessness or emptiness, if you know what you're doing. Um, there's a bit of literature from the classics that say body scanning or sort of analytic meditation in general can be an antidote to mental laxity, that other quality, sinking, where your mind becomes less lucid, less awake. So again, I'm training you in a technique that's really good for making the mind calm in a way that also, just as we go, is also attacking the next problem you're going to have. And you don't have to know it's going to do that. It just will, because this is the kind of technique that does that. You see? So, understanding these theoretical things will give you more confidence. I talked about this actually in the because I assume the people in the Lohan course would be a bit, they'd be a bit hardcore because we're building the course that way. So in the way that I teach Foundation 1 in the Lohan course, for example, I spend the video I think is like 40 minutes, and I spend about 10 minutes just trying to remove doubts about the technique. Because you're training your mind with your mind. If you have wavering in your mind, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? Is this the right thing? Is this not the right thing? That wavering stops the intent from having enough force to do the thing that the technique is intended to do. The technique works because of the force of your intent, the force of your will. So if there's wavering in your will because you have doubt, then it won't work. In addition to that, if you don't have a powerful why, if you don't have a powerful reason motivating the intent, right? The intent is almost, in a sense, in this limited sense. Hey DJ, welcome. uh it's a bit like an like a cannon, right? Or a bit like a cannonball. And the reason, the why, is like the powder you've packed in behind the cannonball to fire it off, right? So if you put only a tiny bit of powder in there, the force of the intent, the force of the sort of firing, let's say, of your mind will be quite weak, relatively speaking. I mean, you can brute force it, I suppose, but if you pack a really powerful reasons, like here's why I'm doing this, here's the real consequences to my life if I don't do this, Here's the real consequences to my life, to the positive, if I do actually do this, right? If I don't do this, my emotions will be more out of control. And I'm going to hurt more people. And I'm going to hurt myself more. And I need to do this to attain nirvana and enlightenment according to this system that I think is so important. So I won't do that if I don't do this. So I won't get nirvana and enlightenment. I'm going to screw up a whole bunch of stuff in my life that I could have avoided screwing up, right? So the more powerful the actual reasons are that are getting you to the cushion on the one hand and motivating the actual practice, putting the powder behind the cannonball to fire it off with great force. The greater that force is, the more intensity and power there's going to be behind the mind that is putting the mind on the object. You see it? Because you're training your mind with the mind. So if the mind is wavering or the mind's reason for what it's doing is weak, there's less force to the activity. So this is part of why, if you read the Eightfold Path, can anybody without using Google tell me what the first aspect of the Eightfold Path is? While I'm waiting on that, I'll talk a little bit about mantra. So Paul, okay, somebody got it. Okay. I'll come back to the other questions in the chat. Right view. Why is right view the first thing on the Eightfold Path? Why is having correct ideas about things, the first thing on the path? Think about it from a totally conventional point of view. If you wanted to, I don't know, some of you are probably, my age, I'm 40. If some of you, if you wanted to go back to school and it was going to take you 6 years and a lot of money and a lot of heartache and sacrifice and all sorts of stuff to re-skill yourself to do something, right? If you wanted to do that, you need to have a really powerful reason for doing it, don't you? You need to make sure that you've really thought it through. The benefits are like standing out to you in a like they're completely obvious. This is exactly what I need to do because I want all of these benefits that come from this. And if I don't do it, I'm going to be stuck with all of this BS in my current career or whatever that I don't want. So I have to do this thing. So why does right view, the right ideas about stuff and the right worldview come first? Because it motivates you and it makes the effort you're putting in extremely forceful and it makes your practice stable over a longer period of time. If you don't have a worldview to support the practice and you don't have reasons that are driving the practice with great force, then it's a lot harder and it's less stable than if you had a worldview and reasoning that are driving it forward. You see? So that I cover this in the book materials that'll eventually live on uh, the Five Foundations course. But in the in the Lohan course, I just sort of mentioned this right off the bat, where I'm like, okay, listen, if you want to have great force of mind comes from having a strong why. Why are you doing this? And the stability of your practice over a long period of time comes from a worldview in which that practice makes a lot of sense to be doing. If you didn't have a worldview that supports the practice, not just like I like meditation, that's not a worldview, or not just I've had a few nice experiences. No, that's not a worldview. It's motivating for a period of time because you're inspired or whatever. But you have to have a worldview in which meditation's an absolute necessity and must be done, right? If you have that, you will do meditation training over the long term. And when you do it, there'll be great force to what you're doing instead of it being sort of a whatever activity. Yeah. Okay. So this is quite important to not have doubts about the individual technique you're doing and to have a worldview and a motivation that add force and power to the mind that is doing whatever technique you no longer have doubts about. If you have doubts, you can't have forceful intent. Or your intent will be forceful one day and it'll be weak the next day because you have doubt. If you don't have a stable worldview, then same thing. Some days your motivation will be strong, some days it'll be weak, some days the force of intent will be powerful, sometimes it won't because and eventually like you'll wax and wane in terms of what you do because you're not really convinced it's worth doing. So this is why the worldview on worldview comes first in the eightfold path. You need to have the right ideas about stuff and the right worldview and the right stuff. Then shortly thereafter, there's effort and intent and blah blah blah. Right. So these things come out of having the worldview, and then on the worldview, you build up reasons why. Like, why am I doing this? So here's my worldview. Now, why am I doing this based upon how things are in the world? And then out of this comes strong effort, strong intent, and a long-term, mature, stable attitude about what you're doing. So for some of you, it's really important to let that soak in. So some of you, again, I'm not going to put anyone individually on blast because I don't do that. But this is why you need to study. If you're encountering this stuff and you're still in the first 5 years of your practice and you have a huge amount of enthusiasm, study, study, become entirely convinced as best you can by the worldview and the reasoning and the other things that hold everything together so that when the enthusiasm wears off, the beginner's enthusiasm wears off, what you're left with is a mature attitude that carries you forward for the rest of your life. So it's really important. Okay. So Paul asks about mantra. In terms of the five foundations that I teach, I don't teach mantra as a technique, but where you could bring it in to my techniques and it would work quite well is when you're doing Mahamudra style practice and you've got the five external senses relative they're starting to calm down a bit and you're starting to be able to pull them in some of the bandwidth of those in so that you can look at the central mind. Once you're looking at the central mind, first I start with looking at mental content. Now, when you start doing observation of mental content, one of the approaches that works really well is instead of just observing whatever happens to be there, you replace what's there with something else. Like one of the Thai forest lineages does the Budo mantra, right? So mentally you're reciting Budo, Budo. And so now my central mind is observing mental content that is a type of mental content you are deliberately controlling. And then you extend the Budo mantra, in my understanding of how you use this mantra, you extend it and you extend it until there are gaps between when you're saying it and when you're not. And in these gaps, same way as I teach, right? Normally I just say observe whatever happens to be there until the gaps start showing up, which will happen naturally. Another great technique, skillful technique is you recite a mantra, right? So this is you reciting Budo, right? And then you leave gaps. Budo, gap, Budo, gap, right? And then in the gaps, you start seeing what mind is. And then eventually you stop saying the mantra and you're observing the qualities that are available to be observed of the central mind. It's a wonderful, wonderful technique. It works very well. Can be very successful. And then, of course, if you're involved in tantric practice or whatever, there's hundreds of other mantras and ways of using mantra and all sorts of interesting tools to work with yourself. Again, I don't teach those, but they work and they're out there. And if you were further down the path and you wanted to use those at the appropriate time, definitely you should. At the right time. Like after you've studied in Kagyu tradition, let's say for 5 years, 10 years, and then you take your first empowerment as a Kagyu practitioner, and you already have all of the moving parts of Kagyu practice really working, and there's some real transformation that's already happened using the ordinary methods. Then you go down the tantric thing, you go down the tantric route, and using that as the engine to drive the tantric process forward, you add on new tools, new layers that make things work even better and happen even faster. Okay, in body scanning, attention works a bit like narrowing a light cone. How do you think about shifting the focus on several points at the same time? Is it another type of attention? Okay, so when I'm teaching that technique and the six directions is a technique that comes from Mahamudra. Um, and so you have a couple different options if you're training concentration, right? You can either observe an object, let's say, or an activity in one of the sensory fields, because everything you experience comes through the sensory fields. So you can either observe something in the sensory field or an activity in the sensory in a sensory field or two, or you can zoom out and take the entire sensory field as a whole as the object of concentration. So you can either squish your attention into one area and observe something in that area, or you can deliberately spread the mind out to simply abide in the fundamental properties of one of your consciousnesses. When I say fundamental, I'm not talking about the emptiness of them and all of this. I just mean the most basic, the ground properties of consciousness. So when with vision, for example, vision, if you don't do anything with vision, it it naturally generates experiences of seeing things, and it knows or is aware of the things that it has generated. That's what it does when you're not doing anything with it on purpose. So if you zoom out so that you stop doing things with vision on purpose and you just take in the whole field, now you're gaining experience of that whole field. So when I teach 5 points, I'm taking you towards the ability to do full body meditation on one of your sensory full body meditation, which is concentration on one of your sensory fields, one of the six things that make you up as a being. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. Okay, so Jay says worldview comes with practice, and then worldview promotes the practice. This is right. So the eightfold path isn't entirely linear. These things grow together. So you obviously you don't wake up. Yeah, you're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and go, okay, I'm doing nothing else until I have the view. You know, if you did that, and you did nothing else other than that, it'd be very very difficult, I think. So the view will grow up with your practice. That's true. But the view has a lot to do with study and studying things until you're really convinced. Not because you want to be a faithful Buddhist, but because you think the arguments and evidence are good. Yeah, DJ, that's right. It creates a positive feedback loop. And as the worldview has less doubt, and as the worldview has more why in it, why am I doing this? Because the worldview, let's say, for example, just to make it less sort of ambiguous, karma and rebirth. Okay, two difficult subjects for most people not raised Buddhist. Ah, thank you, Lang. I appreciate it. So karma and rebirth. The first the first level of Buddhist motivation that's true Buddhist motivation, according to the great saints, is when you want to have a good rebirth. That's it. Right? That's the first level. So when you're convinced that rebirth is a real thing and that it is possible through your actions to create a future good rebirth. So this is already pretty demanding, in terms of your worldview. If you weren't raised Buddhist and you were raised by people saying, uh, "Oh, actually it's all material and there's nothing but the material world, and you're kind of stupid and gullible if you think there's more than that and whatever, you know? So the first level of motivation is I don't want to fall into a bad rebirth. I want to have at least a rebirth that's as good as the one that I currently have, and I don't want to lose access to the Dharma when I die. So what is that why will drive that reason, right? That why am I doing all this? Will drive you to do certain things. And I had a debate with this and a very interesting debate with a sort of a secular Zen guy once. And he said, "Yeah, but I would be doing all the same I'd be doing all the same things if I believed in karma and rebirth." And I said, "No, because there's a whole bunch of stuff in terms of karmic theory that isn't intuitive stuff to do if you're a secularist, like reciting sutras, right? It seems like sort of a weird religious ritualistic thing. But if you're going to be reborn eventually, there's this I can't remember the term. I think it's the Dharma stream, for example, that every sutra you've ever heard, at some point when you recall past lives, you'll be able to remember them if you've heard them. So by reciting those sutras or by having other people recite them on your behalf, etc., you're creating sort of a situation karmically that will be much better for you in the future than if you hadn't done that. And you're creating a circumstance in the future where, through having heard it in particular, you're now going to have access to that information at some later time in your training where you're much further along than you are now. And that's really advantageous at some point to have hundreds of thousands of pages worth of information taught by great beings available to you when you want it. And if you just did just sitting practice for a long time, you're not going to have all of that information. And there's no logical reason really that you would recite all that stuff when you can't you can't remember it all after reciting it. Yeah, Matri, like if you genuinely understood. And then there's a lot of little things, right? Like, okay, think about in terms of karmic theory, there's ways to purify past negative karma according to the Mahayana sutras, of which Zen is a part. But if you think there's no such thing as karma, you're never going to do the specific practices that purify negative karma because you think there's no such thing. Furthermore, if you think there's no such thing as positive and negative karma, it won't matter to you that much if you break your vows because it becomes just a practical thing, right? It's sort of like, well, I'll keep my vows when it's sort of convenient. I won't keep them when it's not convenient because no one's keeping count anyway. So there's no real impetus to keep your vows in the same with the same level of seriousness. Because breaking your vows, according to karmic theory, is incredibly serious. Let me describe a little bit of karmic theory, and this will make a bit more sense, and then I'll circle back to the chat. A karma has four aspects: the object or thing upon which you are acting, the motivation and intention driving the action, then what's called the effort to complete the action, which is all the stuff you do that has to be done to make the action come to actually happen. And then there's the completion of the action, which one of my teachers basically described as sort of like your reaction to the fact that you completed the action or got it done, right? So in addition to this, certain objects are more powerful. Why are they more powerful? Because of the type of object they are. And when I say object, I also mean types of beings. So an object could be a Buddha, or it could be your mother, or it could be a monastery, or a book, right? So whatever you're acting upon, person or non person, realized being or non realized being, So some objects have more karmic force than other ones. And again, if you were a secularist, it wouldn't be obvious to you that it's a big problem to step on a monk's robe rather than stepping around it, right? What's the big deal? There's no cosmic sense in which me stepping on a robe causes any problems. Okay, but a person who holds 200 and something vows and their intent is to benefit all sentient beings by training their mind towards enlightenment, and they've taken a whole bunch of vows to see that through, even if they're not a great monk or nun, they're like an okay monk or nun. They have a dharma, they have actual dharma in their minds because they're holding those vows. And stepping on their clothing is not a good thing karmically for your future. And that's not obvious to you if you're a secular Zen practitioner. You think, well, it's just cloth. It's just some cloth laying on the ground. What's the big deal? If I happen to step on it, who cares? Right? I mean, I probably shouldn't because that's kind of a dick thing to do. But like, if I couldn't get through the hallway or whatever, and there was like, I'm not gonna stop in the hallway and not walk through or something because I have to step on someone's clothing. It's just clothing. What's the big deal? So the fact that you think karma and rebirth is a real thing will change hundreds of thousands of actions you perform throughout your life. And it will change the way you do your practices. It will change the things you emphasize in your practice. It will change the types of practices you do over the course of many years. If you don't think any of that is real, you won't do any of that unless you're just sort of like, well, some people who maybe have like they were formerly Catholics or they were whatever, you know what I mean? Where there was a lot of rules or they're sort of rule abiding people where you go, well, the rules say to do this, so it's what I'm going to do, right? There are some people that are like that. And then there are some people who are like, if I don't understand the rule, I'm just going to do what I want to do, you know? Anyways, so having karma and rebirth as a worldview then changes all the why and it changes what you're doing. So beings who hold vows, very powerful karmic objects. The things that belong to those beings holding vows, very powerful karmic objects, like the robes of monks and nuns. Um, Holy places where people are using that location to train their mind, like a monastery. Holy objects like stupas that represent aspects of an enlightened being's body or speech or mind. Extremely powerful objects. Why? Well, whoever was here yesterday understands how rare it is to even hear the word Buddha in the way that we mean it. It's so rare, it's basically impossible, and yet here it is. According to Buddhism, I mean, it's like this unbelievably rare thing, and it's here. So the karmic weight of those objects, even the objects and the way that you interact with them is astronomically huge. In one of the let me see if I can find it and put it on the screen because this will be a little bit richer than me just saying a bunch of stuff. Yes, that's in that document. So I wrote an article quite a while ago on worship on worship and veneration. And to address your question there, DJ, I'm about to address that question now. Let's see if I can. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is not bad. Okay. Right. Let me change it over and see if I can find the right screen. It may be not on the right screen to begin with. Ah, perfect. Okay. So I wrote this article quite a ways back for a Buddhist magazine. They didn't end up publishing it because I had written it in response to 3 articles they had written over the last 5 years that said the opposite. They said there's no worship in Buddhism, there's no veneration in Buddhism, There's nothing like faith in Buddhism. And I was like, you have to be joking. From the Pali Canon to the Chinese Agamas to the Sanskrit Canon to the Tibetan Canon, every language of Buddhism we've ever found ancient Buddhist texts written in, you find worship, devotion, faith. It's all over the place. Okay, so why is it that the karmic potential of something like an image of a Buddha is so powerful? What is the reason for this? Here's the reason. The Sutra of the Mudra of Developing the Power of Devotion says, there's a quote where the Buddha is talking to Manjushri. He says, Manjushri, a son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage, which is a Buddhist practitioner, could offer divine food endowed with hundreds of tastes and likewise divine garments with refreshed enthusiasm. So the underlying term there implies that you're not just offering sort of with a boring mind, right? You're not like, oh God, I've got to make another offering. But every single time, every day, you're doing it with the same sort of enthusiastic mind. So you're offering the food of the gods and the clothing of the gods every day with an enthusiastic feeling for eons. And we went over what an eon is, right? For eons equaling the sand grains in the river Ganga. So this is an eon is already an unimaginable period of time, and we're going to offer for an unimaginable number of eons. Two solitary realizer arhats, so pratyeka Buddhas, those beings who attain arhatship alone without other Buddhists around in order to benefit the beings who would otherwise not encounter an arhat. So we're making offerings for an unimaginable period of time, for an unimaginable measure of time, an unimaginable number of times. Yeah. And we're doing it to solitary realizer arhats equaling the dust particles of all the realms of the universe. So, and this term dust particle here, when I translated this, you can translate it dust, but it actually means it's dharma, right? So it's saying the smallest particles that exist according to Buddhist metaphysics. And you could think about it like the standard model of physics. There are basically these little tiny particles that make up everything else. That's what it's referring to here. So if we took all of the particles in the entire universe and turned each one into an arhat, and you made offerings to them for an unmeasurable number, uncountable number, almost uncountable number of eons, which are almost uncountably long. He says, by comparison, Manjushri, if a son of the lineage or a daughter of the lineage, sorry, if a son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage or anyone else, included, this means just a random person who doesn't even believe in any of this, sees a painting of the Buddha or a statue of the Buddha, this generates countless greater merits. And merit is a specific type of good karma that propels you further down the path. So doesn't just create pleasant results. This is pushing you down the path towards full enlightenment, towards the results of Buddhist practice, right? So just seeing painting of the Buddha, statue of the Buddha, generates countless greater merits than all of this. Offering the food and clothing of the gods for an uncountable period of time, repeatedly, almost an uncountable number of eons, to an uncountable number of arhats. Why? Well, we're not at why yet, but because of this, he says, there's no need to mention putting your hands together and doing a prostration or offering incense or aromas like perfumes and so forth, one of the traditional offerings, or lights, which generates even greater countless merits. So, where did the? Oh yes, okay. So this is from a different sutra, but it explains why. So this is in the Great Rumble Sutra, which I should have italicized there. So the Great Rumble Sutra explains why these beings are so powerful. He says, because a thus gone one, a Buddha, right? A Buddha is a being who has immeasurable qualities. A Buddha has infinite qualities, good qualities. infinite ethics, infinite concentrations, infinite wisdom, infinite liberation, and a whole bunch of other things. They have infinite compassion for sentient beings. They have infinite good qualities. And therefore, I don't think I put it in this article, but therefore, the the merit that you generate simply by seeing a Buddha, which is this unbelievably rare thing, not even a Buddha, but just a representation of a Buddha, is beyond measure. It is virtually infinite. It is greater than making offerings of all kinds to other beings who are highly capable. All right, Hans, see you later. So again, the reason for this is because you're dealing with a being who is infinite. These beings, by comparison, arhats, are still limited. So mathematically speaking, if you take the number one and you multiply it by infinity, you get a number that, there are different sizes of infinities, but you're gaining an infinite number, an infinite amount of merit in relation to Buddhas when you're doing these things, and an even larger infinity of merit when you do other things in regards to these beings. When you do good actions in regards to arhats, by comparison to Buddhas, since arhats are still limited beings, it's one times X amount of merit, roughly speaking, right? So in the one case, even though it's unbelievably meritorious to make offerings to arhats, especially of this quality, with enthusiasm for this period of time unbrokenly, because unbroken actions that you do every day also creates even more merit, right? So this is incredibly meritorious, but it's still a finite amount of merit. Your interactions with Buddhas, even statues and images of Buddhas, is creating infinite merits every time, and even greater infinities of infinities when you're doing more than simply looking at the image. Okay, now having said all of that, let me get back to the regular screen. Having said all of that, now let's say that you're one of these guys who, speaking of light offerings, having said all of that, let's say you're one of these guys who thinks, well, no, there's no karma, there's no rebirth, all of that's fake. Doesn't really matter if I look at images of Buddhas. That's all spiritual materialism anyway. And didn't the Buddha say that we shouldn't have statues and we shouldn't have paintings and we shouldn't have monasteries? No, the Buddha never said any of that. The Buddha said the opposite. If you look at all the Buddhist sources, the Buddha encouraged us to build monasteries, encouraged us to create statues and images, encouraged us to make stupas, encouraged us to show devotion to those objects because as representations of infinite beings, they produce infinite merit when you interact with them. This is an incredibly beneficial thing to do. Like unbelievably beneficial. But if you don't believe in karma or rebirth, eh, who cares? And maybe you're even doing the opposite of rejoicing. When you see people do that, you go, oh, they're so stupid, they're doing the wrong thing. So now you're doing negative action, the opposite of rejoicing, when you see other people doing this. Repulsion, arrogance. Oh, they're so small. Look how dumb they are. Worshipping, venerating objects. Here I am, sitting, observing my mind. So, again, none of that is intuitive, right? It's not intuitive that building a stupa and then looking at it would create infinite benefit for you and other beings in the future. Infinite benefit. That's not an obvious that's not an obvious thing. That's something that's only obvious to a Buddha who can actually look at the entire karmic situation and say, this is what happens. I'm just letting you know. If you were interested, this is what happens when you do this. Okay. So worldview. If if you have a worldview, it changes the why right? It changes the why of what you're doing. Why am I doing this? And that worldview also changes the what. What do I do? Because what I do will depend upon what I think is real and what I think is important amongst the things that are real, won't it? So if you want to have great force in your meditation practice, you need to have a very stable, mature worldview. I'm speaking mostly to the Buddhists now, but even if you're not Buddhist, if you think, for example, that meditation should be a profound part of your Eastern Orthodox practice, make the reason and the worldview really congeal around that issue so that your mind has incredible force when you do your nightly prayers instead of sort of like, well, my priest said I have to do this, you know? Or if you're doing Hindu practices, same thing. If you're doing Sikh practices, Jain practices, it doesn't matter. But if, from my standpoint, if you're here to do Buddhist practice, then the worldview creates the what and the why and adds great force to what you're doing. Right. Okay. Right. Let's see. My understanding is that Budo isn't entirely shamatha. It works better in Buddhist cultures. It additionally serves for, yeah. So again, also think about this, right? Why would you use the Budo mantra? Why would you say the name of the Buddha? Because saying the name repeatedly of an infinite being in your mind, a being who has infinite good qualities, creates infinite merit. So then you're not just training in concentration, you're also developing refuge so that you don't lose your connection with Buddha's teachings in your next lifetime. And you're also creating infinite merit while training in concentration. So you're not just training in concentration, you're creating huge amounts of merit and increasing your refuge practice. You see how skillful these systems are? And they make a ton of sense once you understand the worldview. It makes a ton of sense. Yeah, it's a fantastic way to do it. Okay. Next. Next. Secular Zen. Yeah. Yeah, it's a thing. If you knew karma in your bones, I think I responded to that. Maybe I have an elephant dormant memory of the Dharma. Some of us probably do. For it's not like we're great beings or anything, but some of us potentially in our last life, we were like a cultural Buddhist. You know what I mean? And we listened to a few teachings and we made offerings at the monastery or the temple. That's possible. That quite a few of us, like, we haven't done a lot of serious practice, or we'd probably be a lot further along than we are in this life. But it's possible because there have been about 35 human lifetimes worth of teachings that have occurred up to now in terms of the Buddha's teachings, 34 or 35 average human lifespans, that some of us have relatively recently done some stuff. Maybe we kept precepts, maybe we took a few teachings, maybe, and some of that information and some of what we developed there might come back up through practice. That's possible. You don't have to put too much sort of, I don't know, too much sort of emphasis on that aspect. If it's there, it'll come up through practice, and if it's not there, it won't. Okay, could that be Buddhist propaganda? Yeah, I mean the question of whether or not it's true is a different question, right? Tsering, I'll be right to you. So quite often what I'm doing, quite often what I'm doing, I was just talking with somebody in the comment section about this, where they yes, of course, Tsering, I'll just give me 1 minute. So quite often what I'm doing is I'm not even trying to prove the view is correct. I'm just trying to get people to know what the view is. you know, like we are quite often so far even from what the idea is that, as you know from watching my Buddhist PhD responds videos, some of you, like I was talking to my wife about this today, and I go, I listen to stuff in popular culture and these theologians and academics and whatever talking about Buddhism, and they'll go, Buddhists say this and it's really ridiculous and it doesn't hold together. And I go, yeah, you're right. That doesn't hold together at all. It's a good thing we don't teach that. you you know? Like people are so far from even just having the basics of these ideas correct that they can't even criticize them yet. So people have rejected karma without even knowing what it is. They've rejected rebirth without understanding what it is. I mean, this Zen gentleman I was talking about rejected rebirth because he said that selflessness and rebirth can't live together. And I went, okay, then you don't know what selflessness is and you don't know what rebirth is. Because selflessness, the Buddha never taught that you don't have a self. The Buddha taught there's a specific category of selves, that one and a couple others. There's like a small handful of categories of self you don't have. And this is a problem because you think you do. If you didn't think you do and even perceptually perceive that you do, misperceive that you do, it wouldn't be a problem, but you do. So you have a continuity of consciousness that goes from the beginning of this life to the end of this life. And Buddhism says it doesn't start when you're born and it doesn't end when you die. That's what continues on. And the type of self you think is in there isn't in there. But that continuity of consciousness is a real thing. There's no contradiction between selflessness and the continuity of consciousness between lives. All right. I digress. Could it be Buddhist propaganda? Again, the question of whether or not this stuff is true is a different question than just getting the ideas right in the first place. And most of us, I think, need to just spend more time trying to figure out what the ideas are actually. And the way you'll do that is by studying this stuff in a lineage somewhere. If you study in a lineage somewhere, that lineage will communicate to you over the course of 5 or 10 years of regular study and training with them. They'll tell you what all of these things are and how they work according to at least one lineage. All right. Then there's the question of is it true? And I think that's much more difficult to answer. And I was just talking about this in the comment section of one of the older videos that I did with a Christian gentleman. And he was basically saying, "Look, I've had spiritual experiences that indicate to me that Christianity is true, and we have great saints, for example, who have seen Buddhas in hell. So who do I listen to? My own spiritual experiences and my saints or your saints who say that Buddhism is true and that they have their spiritual experiences." He said, "Well, for myself, I sort of put that aside and because I could be wrong, I put that aside to a degree and I listen to Jesus and I listen to him because he came back from the dead, which proves that whatever he says must be true." And I haven't gotten a response yet, but I pointed out that in Tibet, in Tibetan tantric practice, we have a whole category of practitioners who came back from clinical death. And why don't you listen to them? you know, if coming back from the dead is the one miracle that can't be faked by a demon, and we have a whole category of practitioner that do this, and we have descriptions of how a practitioner might do it, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you listen to them? They're even more recent than Jesus. Probably with better historical attestation since there's so much distance. There are practitioners who are relatively recent where they've done this. In any case, the point is not that actually. The point is that if we're going to try to prove that Buddhism is true, that's a different project than just describing it properly in the first place. No, DJ. We say in Buddhist Tantra, for example, if you do Tantra really badly, you can be reborn in the hells and you'll look like a Buddha in the hells because of the type of practices you did. For example, if you spend a lot of time visualizing yourself as a Buddha, but you're doing a lot of negative actions while you're visualizing yourself as a Buddha, you can be reborn in the hell realms and with a body that looks like a Buddha. So I would actually expect, like if I was just predicting what you might find in the hells, I would expect that there would be some beings there, according to our worldview. I would expect to find some beings that look like Buddhas. So I don't even have to deny that, like in near death experience or visionary experience, that someone might see beings that look like Buddhas in the hells. Right? Like I would tell you, you'd probably would see beings like that in the hells. Right? So this is what I'm saying. Like if you actually understand what Buddhism is saying, we can actually take on board that some Christians have near death experiences where they meet Jesus and go to a heavenly realm. That all fits in my worldview. And oh, you saw some Buddhas in the hell realms? Yeah, that fits in my worldview. There probably should be some beings that look like Buddhas in the hell realms. Like, again, I can give you all of this and still say, I think you don't have the complete picture. Respectfully, Mr. Christian. Okay, let's see. So, how do we prove Buddhism is true? Big project. Um, And I think it takes more than just reason and evidence. I think it takes a bit of relationship and community too, because we're not just reasonable beings. We're feeling beings. We're emotional beings. We're relational beings. It takes more than just getting the ideas right and the logic right and the evidence right. It takes some relationship. So, for example, in my own case, um, as I've said many times, I started out kind of wanting to believe in all this, and I couldn't. I literally, despite wanting to be sort of the good Buddhist, I couldn't make myself believe it all. And I had huge doubts for years. I think it took me like 12 years to be relatively convinced, like 80-20 ish or 90-10 ish for karma and rebirth with good teachers at my disposal. And ultimately, what I did was I looked a lot at children with past life memories and the research there. And I looked a lot at the best research we have on near death experience. And I looked a lot at modern physics. And there's a whole branch of modern physics called the special status of consciousness interpretation of quantum mechanics. And I realized that you can actually make a really good argument, that and some philosophy. There are modern philosophers like David Chalmers who make really good arguments that consciousness can't be a physical thing. Experience is not made up of electrons, protons, and neutrons. Internal experience and even the experience of external objects, like the fact that this looks white to you, there's no white in the world. White is a qualia, something a conscious mind experiences. It's not a quality. It's not something that exists out there in the world. And some of you might be saying, yeah, but there are photons and those photons. No. If certain beings see these photons, it will produce a different color. When their mind generates an image based upon being stimulated by these photons, it will produce a different color than it produces for us. How do we know? Because human beings, when they see this object, for goodness sake, don't see the same hue. They see different hues. We've done research on this, and we literally do see different colors. It's more dramatic between men and women. Women see more colors than men, generally speaking, but even within the same kinds of groups, people see different colors. So the color isn't out here in the world, and it's not made up of protons, electrons, and neutrons. Okay, I digress. Anyways, the point is I had to collect a lot of evidence, and then the other thing that happened is I hung out with really great practitioners. So there's a relationship aspect where I went, the texts say that great practitioners should be able to do these sorts of things. I've never seen that, so I have my doubts. Right? Why wouldn't you? So then I met some great practitioners and I found out that actually those capabilities are relatively common amongst great practitioners. And they very much can do the things that are described in the texts. Amongst great practitioners, those are things that human beings can do. And if you spend not a short time, but if you spend 5, 10, 15 years around a great practitioner, maybe once or twice in your time knowing them, they will show you something like this. And then you don't have to take it on faith, right? So then you combine scientific evidence, philosophical evidence, personal experience, relationship combined with actual demonstration of these things that you think are mythology that aren't mythology at all, and so on and so forth. And this combines into one package that makes me think as a person Buddhism probably has the best explanation of all this. It doesn't mean everyone else is absolutely wrong. It just means that there are some pieces missing from some of these other pictures. Is the best that I can do as a person in figuring this out. And I could be wrong. Of course, if I thought I was wrong, I would just do something else. But okay, here we go. So, question DJ and Sarang, I'll do your question next. DJ asks, my house had the fat, jolly, laughing Buddha. My family called it Buddha. Is that bad karma? Said hearing the name is one in a million merit. You know, I don't know. It's sort of weird, right? To think that so many people would look at a bodhisattva and think it was a Buddha and not understand that a Buddha is different than a one particular representation of a bodhisattva from China. It's a weird circumstance, right? I mean, it's not really bad that people would encounter the image of a bodhisattva from China, and especially if they look at it and they like it or whatever. If it makes them feel good to look at it, that's probably not a bad thing. But it is a weird karmic circumstance where so many people think that a particular bodhisattva who was overweight, who became quite popular in China in terms of representing certain qualities of accomplished beings, that bodhisattva has become known in the wider world as the Buddha is weird, right? I don't know what to say about it exactly. Okay, so Tsering Lama says, at my age, 63, what are the chances of becoming a good meditator? Okay, um, it depends a bit on you, and it depends a bit on your teachers, I would say. There's no like odds for or against it. It's not a thing to do with odds. Uh, if you have a lot of drive and you have good teachers and you have faith in those teachers and you apply the instructions that they provide, you can make a lot of progress. And there are cases in Buddhist history and Tibetan Buddhist history in particular where people started at age 40 or 50 or 60 or 70 and went basically all the way down the path in the course of 10 or 15 years. Again, those cases aren't like the everyday example, but there are quite a few examples like that. And I actually tend to think, for example, like let's say you're 64. Belle, I haven't seen you in a while. Welcome back. So let's say you're 63, 64 years old, but you've taken relatively good care of your body and your body still works quite well and there's not too much pain. And let's say that you're doing stuff like Tibetan yoga or Hindu yogas or Lohan Palm that makes the body stay comfortable for a longer period of time. And let's say that you're not eating perfectly or something, but you're eating well enough that, because when you get into your 60s, what you eat can cause health problems, I think, much more quickly than when you're younger. And that's when people start having heart attacks and this and that, much more often. So let's say that you're eating relatively well enough that it's not degrading your health really rapidly. And then you're relying on your teachers as best you can. And you're doing as much practice as you can based upon your what your body and mind will allow you to do, whatever level is sustainable for you. There's, you know, there are examples. Again, there are examples, especially as you enter retirement years. Think about this, right? If you have less people that are relying on you, maybe you could go into retreat with your retirement money. You could go into your teacher says, "Look, you need to go if you really want to make progress, you need to go into retreat for 6 months and then we'll do the next thing or whatever." Okay. The money is going to come to support you in retreat. They say, "Okay, I want you to take this hut over here by me in Nepal, and then once you do these practices, you'll be doing them 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day or whatever, and you do that for 6 months, and then we'll do the next thing." And it's like, okay, fine. I have the money, my body's working well, the food will be provided by the monastery or whatever, as long as you can sort out the visas. So your later years, if you have less people relying upon you and you can get away and you can do hardcore practice, you can make a lot of progress. See what I mean? I think the Hindus actually got this right in a sense that as you get a bit older and there's less people relying upon you to sort of provide for their daily stuff like your kids and all this, that you could take now as an older person with less people relying upon you and not having to work an active career, that you could now spend a month in retreat here, a month in retreat there, 2 months in retreat over here, maybe sometimes 3 months over there, whatever. And over the course of your remaining, if you lived to an average lifespan, that would be between 73 and 79. So in the let's call it 17 years remaining, that during that time you could spend like collectively 3 or 4 years in retreat. You're going to make unbelievable progress if you do that, and you have good teachers. You don't just want to go into retreat with nobody to help you or something, but definitely. So then also, speaking a bit for more from my heart, if you're going to spend a lot more time in the world, and if you do have people that are relying on you in a certain way, and you can't get away in that way, then you can do practices like the ones that I teach, where you can turn more and more and more of your ordinary life into practice, and then try to do a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks each year. You know, 1 week at a time as you can get away, or you can do partial retreat, where you're still there, like if you had a wife, for example, that had health problems and you can't get away, that you could tell your family, "Hey, I'm going to be taking care of Susan. I'm going to be taking care of your mother, but for the next 2 weeks, I'm not going to be very much in touch. Don't worry, everything's fine, but I'm going to be doing some meditation practice." You know, and then you do your practices and you take care of your wife who's ill or whatever, let's say, or your husband who's ill, or whoever's relying on you, and then you do lots of practice when you're not doing that, and then you just keep everything, all the distractions, to a minimum, and you could spend weeks or months or years doing that with the help of your teachers and make huge progress. You see? So like this, I think it's very much possible, especially as you get older, if you do a bit of work to make sure that the body doesn't break down, because that'll be a huge barrier. Do your best to have something like 18 Lohan, which my buddy Neil is teaching. 18 Lohan is designed to make the body run really well as you get older. 18 Lohan, or the Chinese health arts, Qigong, Neigong, Tai Chi, this sort of thing, which, 18 Lohan's in the same family of stuff. Uh, or yoga, but yoga can be quite tough, I think, on older people's bodies sometimes. People get injured doing yoga because the teachers aren't very good quite often in the West. So you got to be careful with that, but something to make sure that the body keeps running really well. And then do your best to not eat too much stuff that will make the body break down really quick, like if you're eating too much sugar all the time and you get diabetes, that will screw up your practice because the mind won't be as good, the body will be falling apart, you've got to deal with all your symptoms now, and that will slow things down. So basically having to maintain your health should be part of your practice because you want the body and mind to work as best they can for the longest time they can so that you can do more practice. So you shouldn't think that your health stuff is entirely separate from your meditation stuff, especially as you get older. So that'd be my sort of from my heart would be my advice is to steel man the argument. I have never actually. I mean, I'll take a look at it while we're here on live. I suppose. But I have heard on numerous occasions. Yeah, see, I mean the beast or whatever is I don't think that's in the same category because we're not saying like you'd have to be saying that like the devil himself at a very specific time in history is able to come back, right? Yeah, again, I think again the general Christian argument is we can trust Jesus because he came back from the dead, right? Why can you trust Jesus in that he came back from the dead? Why is that a compelling argument? Because this is the only kind of miracle that can't be faked. Control over life and death, or control over life, is the purview of the God who gives life. Every other type of miracle can be faked. This is what I've sort of heard in terms of Christian theology. Demons, for example, can't control life. They can't bring people back from the dead, and they can't bring themselves back from the dead because God controls life. This is part of why I like to sort of poke at the Christians a little bit and be like, yes, but we have so many of these practitioners that come back from the dead. uh, well, okay, fine. If that's what you think, then that argument won't work for you. That's fine, no problem. I mean, to me, all of these things all of these things are sort of like they're like intellectual games, kind of. There actually isn't a right answer to any of this. There's just like whether or not you find an argument compelling or not, and will that argument be compelling enough to motivate behavior changes, or will it, or motivate behaviors, or will it not? Right? Like, there's no actual answer to what the correct interpretation of various biblical passages is. For example, there's just more or less plausible interpretations. Okay. Let's see. Different layers of hell, postmodern. Yeah, yeah, Buddhism has a lot of different hells. There are so many hells in Buddhism. It's not just one flavor. We have frozen hells, and we have hot hells, and we have a bunch of different layers of hot hells that are different temperatures, and a bunch of different cold hells that are different temperatures, and all sorts of other sort of hellish existences that are not hot or cold, but are basically disgusting, disgusting hells. And then there are spirit realms that have really horrific properties, but they're not hells technically. Although if you were there, you would think it was hell. Good times. And then everyone left the stream for some reason. uh, yeah, Jay, I agree with you. I think a lot of religious decision making comes down to here's the best I can do based on what I can see from here. And it's not just religious decision making. That's how a lot of things are. Why are you getting a degree? Well, because I think the odds are better of me getting a better paying job if I have a degree. Do I know that for sure? No. Why am I getting married to this person? Is it because you know you're going to have a great life with that person? No, not really. It's that based on what you can see from here, you think as best you can based on the evidence. Of course, you love them, but you think that you two are going to have a life that's worth living together, and so on and so forth. We make all sorts of serious decisions based upon what we can see from here and trying to extrapolate that into the future. So likewise, yeah, life is a bit of a gamble, and karma, yeah, in terms of the hells, is what produces all of these environments. Uh, yeah, it's really unfortunate. I've talked to one of my teachers about the hells for those who are interested, and they said the hells they're a bit more mental actually. They're not as sort of crunchy and physical as the realm we're in now. It's more like a dream than the human realm, but it's an extremely convincing lucid dream. I heard a really fascinating near-death experience that was along these lines. Yep, here everyone goes. You start talking about the hells, everyone bounces out. Good times, good times. So there's a fascinating near-death experience I heard once. A gentleman who became Christian after this experience, but he went down to one of the hells, and it was mostly one of the disgusting hells. Not there was a bit of the heat thing going on here and there, but and there was all these things he described that I remember seeing in other places in the Buddhist canon. For example, there was this really interesting description. There was this really interesting description he gave on one aspect of his near death experience, where he said that he saw all these people that were standing in filth. They were standing in urine and excrement and disgusting stuff. And he said that underneath it there were these maggots that were like the size of cats, huge maggots, and they were eating the flesh off of the part that was underneath the muck. And that as the flesh was being eaten, it would grow back right away so it could be eaten again, so that they would continuously feel the unbelievable pain of being basically eaten alive without dying over and over again. And there are descriptions like this in the Buddhist canon of some of what happens in the hells. So yeah, it's absolutely horrifically bad stuff that um, if you think about your worst nightmares but never being able to wake up from it, that's basically it. And then also very interesting, when you look at Buddhist stories of people who get out of the hells. Well, no, it's not endless. It's okay. So this is really interesting, right? This is from another near death experience that made me change how I think about. So when you're in a really bad rebirth, like one of the hells or one of the spirit realms, it seems to last like an unbelievably long period of time. Kalpas, eons. It lasts very long period of time from your perspective, but it doesn't necessarily last that long from other people's perspective. And that was interesting. It's an interesting point. And then I heard a guy who he got hit by a car was going by. It was a documentary. A car was going by, and a ladder was hanging off the car, and it hit him in the head. I think this is the one. And immediately after he was hit in the head, he was in a hell realm. So he died instantly. And they brought him back later, but he died instantly, and he was in a hell realm. And he said that when he sort of awoke, so to speak, in that realm, that he had no memory of having been anything else previous to having been that being in that hell realm. And so from his perspective, he had already been there forever. You see? From his perspective, he had already spent his entire existence forever in that place. Isn't that fucked up? But this is a function of memory, that if you have nothing coming before, it seems like this is always how it's been. I've always been like this. And so he wakes up and he's strapped to a wall, and below him there's smoke and fire. And he can't see any of the beings there, but he can hear them screaming. So he knows that there are beings in the fire and smoke that's burning down below him. And again, in the Buddhist canon, it says the same thing. In some of the hot hells, there are beings who are suffering in fire, and you can't see them, You only know that they're there because you hear them screaming, which again is really horrific, really horrific imagery, right? But one of the fascinating things also about that near-death experience and some of the descriptions of the hells in the Buddhist canon is this. I think he recalled something virtuous. He recalled something virtuous somehow. And when he recalled that thing, bang, he was immediately out of the hell realm, which is again really fascinating because this is more like lucid dreaming. And there are multiple hell realm near death experiences that I've listened to where it happens that way, where they remember something virtuous they did from the past, or they call the name of a highly virtuous being, and this is what propels them out. Interestingly, in the Buddhist canon, when you look at the reviver of Rinzai, Hakuan Zenji, he writes of an episode where Kishtigarbha Bodhisattva, if I'm not mistaken, goes into one of the hells. And down in this hell, he finds, ironically, a person who had been reciting one particular sutra their whole life. He finds them in this hell. And it was in the screaming hell, which is a wonderful place where the primary suffering you have is that the sound of wind and screaming and this, like, you know, when you have a neighbor who's really noisy and you can't get away from the sound and it drives you nuts? So there's a hell where sound is the primary suffering. And so there's like screaming and terribly loud wind and all this. And then there's other sufferings and things. But so he's sort of like, interestingly, he had lived in a little tiny house and had his little plot of land, and he recited his sutra, one little sutra his whole life. And he was reborn in this hell in a little house that looked like his house and his little plot of land. And the suffering of that realm couldn't get in, basically, to harm him, but he could hear all of these beings outside suffering, which is really, really sort of interesting. And so Kishtigarbha goes down and convinces him through a series of conversations to generate one virtuous mind. And he generates, to make it simple, he generates a few moments of really powerful compassion for all the other beings that are in this hell realm, and bang, he's immediately reborn in one of the heavenly realms. Really interesting, right? Because that's how near-death experience people talk about it too, where they remember one thing when they're in really bad realms, that one virtue or one holy being's name or one holy prayer, and bang, they get pulled out or they jump out, so to speak. It's a really interesting parallel between what we find in, 1300-year-old texts or 800-year-old texts that talk about what happens in the hells and what near-death experience say about lower realms today. When I found that overlap, I was shocked and quite pleased. Right. So yeah, I mean, if you spend time listening to near-death experiences about lower realms and hell realms, you'll find if you read a lot of Buddhist texts about those realms, they're not identical, but you'll find a lot of overlap between the stuff people say and some of the details provided in Buddhist texts. There's just a ton of like really weird specific details, like being covered in filth in the sort of uncomfortable filth parts of various hells where there are beings who eat your flesh and your flesh grows back right away. That's a really weird detail for like some dude raised in the hood who didn't care about religion ever to go to a hell realm and see that, right? That's a really weird detail for him to bring back. Anyways, okay. Um, And so, yes, karma, since your mind is in the reality generating business, sometimes, unfortunately, it creates really horrific stuff. If the raw materials, if the creative force of your mind that is capable of bringing entire universes into existence, according to Buddhism, gets hijacked by negative karmic image, negative karmic imprint, then an entire negative world of experience comes into existence. You know? Again, really scary stuff. So as one of my teachers said, there's no Acme Hell Company, like Acme, that used to be a thing, the Acme Peanut Company or the Acme, uh, car company or whatever. It used to be in all the cartoons. Some of you who aren't from the US or whatever, it was kind of like a joke, like a running joke. Acme. So, anyways, he said there's no Acme Hell Company that produces all the Hell realms or something. It's just that it's almost like the creative power of your mind. Yeah, you create it through the lens of one negative karmic image, just one. The creative power of your mind gives birth to an entire negative realm of experience. So likewise, even a small yeah, I got to go back to my Tonglen practice. Yeah, seriously. If you want to have powerful Tonglen, go to the Lam go to the Lam Rim and read the sections on the hell realms and the spirit realms and the animal realms and read them in great detail. And then don't stop there. Go to YouTube and listen to like 10 or 15 people who had really fucked up near death experiences where they went to a lower realm or a spirit realm and experienced the unbelievable suffering and confusion and difficulties they experienced there, and then go back to your Tonglen and take that suffering and give those beings happiness. It'll give those practices so much force, so much force, you know, because it's so much worse than you can imagine. And if you hear somebody, this is part of what I mean. Yeah, the Acme company. This is what I mean when I say you don't just take the Buddhist sources. If you take stuff like, I don't know about you guys, but for me, even if let's say 80% or something of near death experiences aren't real, if it's just in somebody's head, if there's some small percentage that are real, for example, and I go, okay, if this one is one of the real ones and not just a fantasy somebody had or what have you, right? Isn't it interesting that this person said they went to a lower realm and that they reported the same thing that great yogis who observe lower realms from their past rebirths and from clairvoyance in the current moment, that they say that there's a lot of the same stuff that this person said? Isn't that interesting? Because this person's Christian and they're saying all of this stuff that isn't described in Christianity about the hells, I saw down there. And the great yogis we have say, yeah, that's what's down there. I mean, again, they're not going to be totally one for one, but there's a huge amount of overlap. From my standpoint, that gives me a lot more faith. So, good question. Good question, Andre. Um, it's a very good question. Okay, so I talked about this a bit earlier in the stream, but like there are quite a few near-death experiences where people will see Jesus, or they'll see the two angels that come at the time of death if you're a Muslim, or they'll see Shiva, or they'll see Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or they'll see Gandalf, like if they're a secular person and they watched a lot of Harry Potter. Like people see all sorts of stuff. So the way that I interpret that personally is that if you have connections with beings who can actually help you in the in between state between lives, according to Buddhism, this is a real thing. There are beings sometimes who can help you between lives. They will appear as whatever it is you need, as your grandfather, as your grandmother from 14 generations ago that you saw in a photo once that made you feel really nice when you were like 7 years old, that you have no memory of right up until that moment, as the Buddha, as Jesus. They will appear as absolutely whatever is ideal for you to try to help you have the smoothest possible transition through this very turbulent, uncertain period where you could go back to the human realm, you could go to an upper realm, or you could fall into really terrible suffering. They're happy to appear as whatever is required to help you try to go the right way. That's my interpretation. Furthermore, when you talk about what people experience in the lower realms, in the hell realms, I was talking about it earlier, but sometimes, Christians come back and they say, "Well, I saw the Buddha in the hell realms." According to Buddhist Tantra, if you spend a lot of time visualizing yourself as a Buddha and then you do negative actions while you're training in Tantra, sometimes you'll be born in a hell realm with a body that looks like a Buddha. So I'm perfectly happy to say that Christians maybe did see beings that look like Buddhas in the hell realms. That wouldn't surprise me at all. you know? Uh, Furthermore, we don't reject the idea that there are devas and that there are heavenly realms and that great accomplished practitioners of various religions can go to heavenly realms through faith in particular deities combined with ethics, combined with some concentration training through whatever means, some of which might not be explicit, training in prayer 5 or 6 times a day, doing the same kinds of prayers over and over and over again, probably will give you a little bit of concentration. So you have some ethics, you have some concentration. You gave, what is it? 5% or 10% of your income to charitable causes throughout your life. These could be the necessary conditions to go to a heavenly realm. This is a real possibility. And the deities that are associated with those realms could appear to you at the time of death and say, "Hey, come on up. Come with us." What the Buddhists say is it's not permanent. And sometimes deities think those realms are permanent because they've never known anything else. They were born there at the beginning of this universe, in those bodies, in those places. They have unbelievable power, unbelievable bliss, and they think that's all there is. They think that they're eternal, but they're not eternal. They think that heaven is eternal. It's not eternal. So they're also confused, right? According to Buddhism, some of these deities. Right. So Um, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if some deities confirm to those practitioners whose entire life is set up. Well, no, you can't create entities like that. You're not creating the entities. There are actual entities out there. And some of those entities will appear to you as what helps you in that circumstance rather than appearing as what they actually are because they want to help you. So this is again how I interpret some of these cases. Okay, so how if your mind's creating hell, are other people suffering there too? Right. So we have collective and individual karma. So collective karma creates circumstances where we both are there and we both agree that a certain thing is happening. Like all of us agree that there's basically like a big universe around us and we're on a planet and we're using technology and you're seeing me on a screen. I'm sitting here in Edinburgh talking. A bunch of devices are picking it up, transmitting it through your computer or phone or whatever, right? Like we agree on a lot of the basic stuff making up reality, roughly speaking. And so collective karma creates collective circumstances. But Jay, to your question, in the spirit realms in particular, there's a lot less overlap. There's a lot less overlap than in the human realm. So you can be standing right next to another spirit, for example, and they're looking at this cup and it's completely empty. And you're looking at the cup and it's filled with pus and blood, or it's filled with ashes, or it's filled with water, right? So in the spirit realm in particular, there can be there are circumstances where there's way less overlap. And sometimes you're standing right next to that being and you don't even know that they're there because you don't share enough karmic condition in common to interact with each other. This is actually what's being said too with regards to realms of rebirth, that there are all sorts of spirits and deities and all sorts of things, and mostly we don't interact with them because there's not very much interaction potential at the moment because of our very, very different karmic setup, so to speak, in terms of how we came into existence and how we abide in existence. Right. Amita asks, is chanting mantra the best method of meditative for ADHD? Chanting mantra has been proven to be pretty effective for autism spectrum people. Um, ADHD, I think body scanning is better. if I'm not mistaken. I think body scanning methods are more effective for ADHD people. What do I prefer in terms of support? PayPal or Venmo is the best because they have the lowest fees, which means that more of your hard-earned money will end up supporting the mission instead of going to a tech company or a bank. So if you send it through PayPal or you send it through Venmo, then basically, I think except for a very small percentage, it goes to me. If you send it through GoFundMe, which is the next one down the line, then you can slide the slider all the way to the bottom on how much do you want to go to GoFundMe, and I think it becomes very, very small, like I don't know, like 3% or something. Uh, so those are all three of those are pretty good ways to send something through if you wanted to support me. And then I have other options set up just because you know it's good to have options, makes things convenient for people. So Andre asks, they don't care if you believe in them in their real form. I mean, they probably do care to the degree that it helps you, but yeah, what they want is for you to be benefited. It's about you. It's not about them. It's about you. You know, they want you to do well. They want you to have benefit. So in the same way that if you were, when you see a little kid and they're scared and you go, "Hey, buddy, how are you? How's it going?" You don't go, "Sup, kid?" One of the things that cracks me up, there's a really funny there's a really funny content creator who he has a little microphone like this, and he pretends to be like an archangel in heaven taking phone calls from Christians. And he goes, I can't remember who he says, but he's like, "This is Archangel Michael. No need to be scared. How can I help you?" Right? No need to be afraid. How can I help you? Because any time that these beings from the devil realms and stuff appear to people in the Bible in particular, they're always terrified, or those beings say, "Don't be scared." Right? So again, I think that most beings in the devil realms, and of course Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, they want their whole reason that they're doing what they're doing is because they want you to benefit. And so they're going to sort of like when you're talking to a kid and you go, "Hey, buddy, how are you? How is everything?" Oh no, he's joking. The content creator guy is joking. But again, this is a biblical thing. Like it these beings in full form as what they actually are is like so unbelievably sort of unbelievably powerful, unbelievably radiant, unbelievably this and this and this and this. Even just for devas, not even like celestial Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Amitabha means limitless light. When you read descriptions of Buddhas, one of the things it says is that, if I'm not mistaken, when they attain enlightenment, that the like unbelievable amount of light emits from their body, right? And this is kind of interesting because when you talk to, again, if you look at near death experience, which can be quite interesting in this regard, quite often people say that when they encounter beings who are sort of like, let's call them in spirit bodies, in subtle bodies, that those bodies naturally emit light, just like when you visualize an apple. Like right now, if like just do this because this is kind of interesting. This is how I think about this. When you visualize an apple, for example, just see an apple in front of you as best you can. That apple is already self-illuminated, isn't it? There's not like a light source in your head back here lighting it up. That subtle physical image, that subtle form is already self-luminous. It's already lighting itself up. So, like this, they say that devas and celestial Buddhas, celestial bodhisattvas, their bodies can emit unbelievable amounts of light. Amitabha is limitless light. The sun, if you stare at it, will blind you. So imagine a being producing at all times unlimited light. Now, if they appeared in that way to you, maybe if you were a certain type of being, it would just it would be unbelievable. But if you're a different kind of person, maybe if your grandfather appears there, you go, oh, my grandfather. Oh, I trust my grandfather. You want me to go that way? Okay, yeah, let's go. You know what I mean? Or if you're a tantric practitioner and your guru appears there, and you go, oh, there's there's Lama so and so. Okay, yes, of course. Can you tell me my tantric name before we go so that I know that you are who you say you are? Yeah, that's right. That's my tantric name. Okay, let's go. You know? As a practitioner, you don't want to spend too much time trying to become different things to different people. You want to do your very best to be authentic and straight up and down. And then just as best you can be skillful in what you say to who and when to try to say what you think is best for the circumstance. All right, my friends, we have arrived at 2.5 hours for our hour-long class. So let me jump in here and give my usual commercial for those who have made it this far. Um, I teach all of this stuff for free, and I do quite a few phone calls usually throughout the week, talking with people to help them with their practice, also for free. And I make the content for free. I don't have any ads on the content, and I'd like to keep it that way. Uh, Genuinely, I just want to take these things that I know and make sure that whoever wants them has access to them. And I would rather not do it at all than put a financial barrier between the people that might need it and the information, insofar as I'm able to help people at all. So having said all of that, I would rather not do it at all and just go back to working a conventional job, so to speak, than charge people for it, if that makes sense. And I've spoken to my teachers about it, and the best I can do is to say to all of you who may stumble upon this, and those of you who are here, that without donations, I can't do this. So if you're getting some value out of this and you're not already a contributor, there are links down below in the description where you could send money through Venmo or PayPal. That would be the best. You could send it through GoFundMe. If you want to do a monthly contribution, for example, you can send it through the GoFundMe. And just make sure you slide the slider down so that most of it goes to me instead of a bunch going to GoFundMe. Although you should give a little bit to GoFundMe too. Also, I have a course through School, and School, Skool. All of that material is also available for free on YouTube. It's the same material, so that's not the point. The point is that if you signed up for School and you want to train with me a little bit more seriously, that's where I'm sort of sending people who want to support what I'm doing financially, and they want to train with me a bit more seriously. Uh, Also, that community, when we get to about 100 people doing that course or signed up for that course would financially liberate me basically to be able to do all of this and never have to talk about the money side of it ever. So it seemed like a pretty good way to set things up for the long run if the people that wanted to support me could just sort of go to one place, sign up for a monthly thing, and then it just carries on. In addition to that, that community, since they're training in my stuff, is using the wall of that group to share things, and I answer questions there. And then you get to benefit from everyone training in the same thing, asking questions about the thing you're training in. and sharing experiences about the thing you're training in. So this is quite valuable. And the final bit about the school group is that when we get to 100 people, between 100 and 200, we can start sponsoring people to go into long-term retreats. So long-term, I mean, between 10 days and 30 days or so. If you have the vacation time and the leisure time, etc., to be able to do a 10 to 30-day retreat, usually the barrier then the next one is financial. How do you take that time away from work and not making money? How do you pay for the retreat itself if it costs some money? So highly recommend, if you'd like to be part of a community that most of the members, I think, I hope, are sort of internally preparing and committing for the idea that we would come together when somebody needs to go into retreat to send people into long-term retreats. That's part of what I'm doing with that community. So think about it this way: if it costs $1,000 for you to go to travel to the place for retreat, to do the retreat, and the money you lost, etc., or that's the amount you would need to be able to do it, that you're going to pay for part of it, but you need another 500 or whatever to be able to do it, right? Let's say it's 500. Well, with 100 people, we all chip in $5. We go, okay, no problem. At some point, I need to go into retreat. You're going to chip in $5 to help me. We're all going to chip in $5. If that was the financial burden, we could send 3, 4, 5 people into retreat every month for between all of us for like $30 or $40 US a month. We could support unbelievable practice in our community. You see how this is stacking up? So this is what I'm trying to build, is a community of people that want to support other people doing serious practice. I'll tell you more about how I'd like to sort of ensure that those funds are going the right places and such, because that's another conversation. But again, this is the idea. So that's my school course. The final puzzle piece, and then I'll go back to questions before we wrap it up for the night, is this. I do a lot of practice using body practices and energy system or vital forces practices like qigong, neigong, etc. Okay? I do a lot of practices like this, and they make a massive, unbelievably massive and important difference to the mental practices that I do. So I can't recommend it highly enough that all of you, in addition to training in something for meditation stuff, also have a physical practice and an energetic practice that supports your meditation practice, because the three of them work together. Now, in terms of the things that are on offer and available out in the world, you have sort of the Hindu systems where you could do yoga, and then you could do like various, I think they're called kriyas, where you're starting to work with the breath and the energy system and so forth, to support your meditation practice. That's an option, and a lot of those are quite good. However, there's also a Buddhist one that most people don't know about that doesn't require tantric empowerment. Most of the time, those practices are hidden behind tantric empowerments in the Buddhist system, which is why nobody knows about them. There's one version I've found, just one that I found, where all of that stuff isn't hidden behind a tantric empowerment. And that is the 18 Lohan Palm system coming out of the Shaolin Temple. And I was very, very fortunate, because I do a lot of Chinese internal martial arts, to find a gentleman who has a complete lineage of that and is authorized by that lineage to carry it forward, that he's a fully qualified person to teach this stuff. And for any aspects, let's say towards let's call them the end stages of those practices, where he's not confident in this aspect or this little piece or whatever, he has teachers and other people in the community who he can rope in and say, okay, here's where, like, theoretically I have knowledge of, sort of like I do with you guys. I know I have the whole theory of it, but also this guy has experienced this part, and I'd like him to jump in and help make sure that this is working as best it can and whatever. And that of course is like 7 or 8 years down the road anyway in the material. So there's a website, I'll put it in the chat, for those practices. And if you use this code on the monthly subscription or this code for the yearly subscription, it is a one video per week system that I'm building with Neil Ripsky is his name. Uh, so that people could go through with just the videos, they could go through the whole system for training. And then also, if you wanted to subscribe, basically, and it costs a little bit more because group classes and so forth. If everybody did it, there'd be 50 people there, and it'd be hard for everyone to get their questions answered. But as an additional support, you could sign up, occasionally, like this month here, that month there, whatever, to do group classes. And then you can do private lessons with Neil as well if you sign up for those when he has time. So yeah, can't recommend Lohan Palm enough. And since I'm helping with the meditation portion of that, teaching all the same stuff I'm teaching already, but it's going to be part of the course. Since that's the case, I also get a portion of the funds that come in through that course. So if you want to support me, you could do Lohan Palm. If you want to support me, you could do the school course. If you want to support me, you could send donations through. Without donations, unfortunately, I can't do this forever. With donations, if this is valuable to everyone, I can do it until I die. So, having said all of that, where are we for the month? Asks Jay. It's a new month, isn't it? Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know how specific you want me to get, but you know, we've got a ways to go. I mean, to really, really make everything work. Unfortunately, I live in the UK and things are a little bit more expensive here, and I think I have to have about £3,500 or so coming in a month in the long run to make everything work. In the short term, about 1,200 coming in a month, and in terms of things that are recurring, I'm not quite there yet. So there definitely has to be some people that are like, okay, this is worth keeping going before there's enough people to maintain it with smaller donations, So we're definitely not there yet for the month, and we're definitely not there yet in terms of subscribers and so forth. So yeah, whatever comes in, dear friends, since we're still early days here in the process, whatever comes in will be very, very much appreciated and very helpful and will allow me to do more things, you know? Uh, okay. All right. Let me answer the last few questions in the chat and then we'll wrap it up for the day. Andres says science has found that time is relative rather than linear. If I'm meditating or visualizing ancient Nepal, could I be reborn as a Buddhist student? So, from a Buddhist standpoint, time is relative, but sort of like special relativity, in my understanding of it, even though time is relative, it's still all moving forward. So it could be that for us, time is moving forward, let's say, at this speed, right? And for the devas, it's moving forward at this speed. But if the two of us were to make contact, it would be like this, so to speak. I don't know if that makes sense. That the points of contact would be at the same time, not at different times. So even though this one's moving faster, that it would happen here when we're interacting with those beings, that there's no way to go back and interact with things that are in the past. So it's sort of as the ships are passing in the night, so to speak, those interactions are possible. Also, I don't know, it's a bit of a weird area of thought. Uh, how do I frame this? Basically, the past is gone from a Buddhist perspective. The past isn't still there. The past gave rise to the present. So all of the causes that are from the past that are related to karma, for example, exist in the present. So all of your karmic seeds exist now, and they have the potential to bring about future events. And they came from the past, but the past isn't like sitting over here still existing. The past is gone because it gave rise to the present moment. And so what's here is the present moment. That everything that happens is happening now, basically. But I don't mean to say that the past is happening now and the future is happening now. What I mean is that this is the only ontologically real moment. This is the only time that actually exists. The past happened before and gave rise to now, and the future will exist when the present moment ceases to exist and becomes the next present moment, which is now what we would call the future, right? But at any given time, there's only one moment in time actually existing. Even though time is moving forward like this, each moment in time is the only one that actually exists. There's no like events that continue to exist over here in the past as time goes forward. Those cease to exist. So yeah, it's definitely not a possibility from a Buddhist point of view that you'd be reborn in the past or in the future. You're going to be reborn in the present moment when the right? There's no future moment that actually exists. There's only future moments that potentially exist. And when a future moment comes into existence and is the present moment, you can be born there, but you can't be reborn at a future time or a past time because those either have already ceased or don't exist yet. Okay, are there beings who may try to do the same but instead deceive you for the bad? Oh yeah. Okay, so we're talking about rebirth. Why do you ask? Oh, you always ask me the dark questions. Everyone always asks me the dark. Always asks me the dark questions. Enzo, hello, welcome. I am. I'm doing well. I have a little bit of a headache today. We spent a lot of time in the sun, my wife and I. It was a nice sunny day. We took a walk around. I have a bit of a headache, but other than that, things are going quite well. Yeah, so unfortunately, there are and this is true also if you listen to near death experience. This is horrifically scary to think about, but you have forced my hand. Even if you listen to near death experience and you just ignore the Buddhists, but the Buddhists say the same thing. Uh sometimes there are cases where it's either actually in reality an external being that wants you to do badly. For example, sometimes really powerful hungry ghosts can appear to you at the time of death, especially if you've been doing a lot of practices in relation to certain hungry ghosts. Which, if any of you were wondering about the Shugden controversy in Tibetan Buddhism, this is the issue. The Shugden controversy is that one of one of the beings who, for a period of time, was considered to be a protector deity in one of the tantric aspects of Geluk Tibetan Buddhist practice, was later discovered by some of the omniscient or clairvoyant beings of the tradition um, to be actually not interested in protecting Buddhism, but actually, in reality, just a hungry ghost who is interested in his own stuff. And because of this, that doing practices in relation to that being, who's not an enlightened being and not a bodhisattva and not on the path, etc., doesn't take you further down the path. And that at the time of death, if that being appears to you, they are horrifically scary because hungry ghosts look, generally speaking, they look really, really scary. And having that negative mental state at the time of death can be really bad for you and cause you to be reborn in a lower realm. So that's why this practice is no longer encouraged, for what it's worth. Okay. So sometimes, yes, certain beings will appear to you and try to make you take a lower rebirth because they're malicious. There are also cases where your own mind will, sort of like a lucid dream, your own mind will present you with information in the form of, as in a lucid dream, right? your mind presents you with symbols basically that represent certain stuff. And I'll tell you a classical one, and then I'll tell you one from a near-death experience because they're very similar in some ways. So there's a classical one where a lama with clairvoyance was watching somebody die, and that person had been a shepherd, had been raising and slaughtering sheep their whole life. And he said that right after that person died, their mind left their body and started sort of wandering around a bit. And then he heard sheep, and he went, "Oh, my sheep." And so he had this feeling of being so happy because you would think, right? It's sort of like, oh, I've been liberated from my body, and now I'm hearing something that's comforted me so much for so many years, the sounds of my sheep. And so he followed the sound of his sheep. And as he got closer and closer to where the sheep were, it became sort of worse and worse. And by the time he arrived at the end point, the sort of destination, it was a hell realm. And he was in a hell realm. So he was just sort of following the predisposition of his lifetime, but it was basically a predisposition of killing a whole bunch of beings. And his mind presented that predisposition to him initially as a positive thing, and he followed it until he was standing in the middle of a hell realm as a hell being, according to the tradition. So now to give you an example that's kind of similar from a near-death experience, there was a woman whose near-death experience I was listening to, and she said that she died. I can't remember from what. I think it was meningitis or something. She died for a period of time, and these two people appeared to her. And at first, they seemed really helpful and normal. And she didn't know what was happening because she was, out of her body, and she's going, "What the hell is going on?" And so these people said, "Come with us. We'll help you out. Come with us. I know this is confusing. This happens to everyone, something like this. Just come with us, no problem." And she's like, "Okay, great. I was so scared and confused. Thank you." And so she starts following these people, and as she's following them, their faces, which were very sort of bright and happy at first, she said they started turning around and going, and their faces got sort of darker and darker and scarier and scarier. And then they were laughing and stuff. And at first it was like, ha, 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 and like quite happy. And then it became sort of like, we got her now. And then at some point she decided, oh, wait a minute, this is like things are getting worse as I follow these people and they're starting to act quite strangely. And then she started to look around and realized she couldn't tell how to get back from where she had come from. And all of a sudden, she described what she was in at that point as being hell. But from a Buddhist standpoint, she had arrived in a hungry ghost realm. And then the things she experienced there are typical of hungry ghost realms. She described it as a hell, as being in hell. But she was wandering around. She was on this road for a long time. She said she spent years looking for food and drink and stuff, and she couldn't find it. And there were all these beings who when they found her, they would beat her up over and over again for no reason. And she was just wandering and wandering and wandering and wandering and couldn't find anybody that would help her and couldn't find anything to eat or drink. And then after some time, she came back to her human body. So yeah, unfortunately, there are cases where either your own mind presents you with information that is wrong, basically, but because you go, "Oh, this is my beloved such and such, or this is this, or this is that," you follow it into really bad circumstances. So one of the benefits of training in tantra, for example, is that if you have samaya, if you have vows with your guru, it's a bit like a hook. Your vows and your samaya and your unbroken commitment to your guru, who's an actual realized being with clairvoyance and spiritual power, his compassion and power is sort of like a hook that goes into the faith and the spiritual commitment that you have, and he can or she can grab onto you in the intermediate state and help you get to a good destination so that you don't have to worry so much about what's going to happen in between. And then likewise, if you do things like train in Pure Land, similar. You create faith, virtue, some concentration, some ethics, charity, blah, 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 while you're alive, and you recite the name of a particular Buddha, like Amitabha, and you recite his sutra and think about what his heavenly realm will be like and generate strong desire to be reborn in that heavenly realm. And then your sort of faith and practice is like a loop. It's like a loop in a rope, and the Buddha's compassion and power can pull you to a particular place. And when you listen to near death experiences that have that sort of flavor, even when someone's reborn in the lower realms, sometimes they remember the name of a holy being. This is so interesting. I mean, I find it absolutely fascinating. That woman I was talking about, she remembered a prayer, I think, that she had been wandering around for a long time, and then she ran into a few other people, and they stayed at a house for a little while, and then the environment got really cold, and she and these other people were sort of freezing in this house. And for some reason, she remembered like a prayer from her time as a young Christian person. It was like like a little tune. And she started singing this tune, and it really pissed off the other people that were there. And she just carried on with it anyway. And then it was almost like a hand reached down and grabbed her and pulled her back up. So again, it's described like this over and over. And let me give you one from the tradition because I think this is so interesting. So the 16th Karmapa, 16th Karmapa, not the 17th one, not the current one, but the previous one, who was considered by many, many beings, many, many people, in the Tukdam documentary that I put on my channel. You can watch some doctors and things talking about when he was dying. So really interesting. He spent some time in Tukdam. In any case, he was really close. I think it was to the king of Nepal, if I'm not mistaken. And in the middle of the night one night, he calls together his attendants and so forth, just randomly in the middle of the night, and says, "We have to do a big puja, a big prayer ceremony for transference of consciousness, which is like helping someone take a particular rebirth." And they said, "Okay, no problem. You're the 16th Karmapa. No questions. You don't need to answer any questions." And they put it all together. They do it. They do this thing, and then he goes to bed. And then a couple hours later, his attendant rushes in the room and says, "We just got a call from the head office of Nepal. The king is dead." He said, "Yeah, I know. That's why we did the puja." Right? He didn't have to get a phone call. So what they say in tantra is that if you have samaya, if you have vows and commitments and faith with your gurus, that when you die, the place that you go first, sort of like they talk about a near death experience where you're sort of wandering around a bit, the place where your mind goes first or pretty early on is you appear in front of your gurus, you appear in front of your tantric teacher, and they know that you're there, and they go, "Oh, what what would you like to do? Can I help you take a human rebirth? Or do you want to go to a heavenly realm? Do you want to go to a pure realm? Where do you want to go? Or do you trust me to take you somewhere that will be good?" And then they do practices and whatever to help you carry on. And so like this, he said, the king of Nepal appeared before me. And so we did the puja and I sent him where he needed to go. And then we went back to bed, you know, before he got the phone call that the guy was dead. So this, again, there are all these techniques and interesting things in the tradition, in the various traditions. In the Thai forest tradition, they talk about, well, if you're not going to attain enlightenment in one life, or if you're not going to attain nirvana in one enlightenment, train your in a lot in concentration and mindfulness, because then the and then you want to generate really powerful virtuous minds right around the time of death, as close to the time of death as you can, so that you're triggering the best possible karmas at the moment of death. And then with mindfulness, you can navigate through the intermediate state much better. There's less chance you're going to go to a negative rebirth if you have really good concentration, really good mindfulness. That's what they say in the Theravada tradition. Which makes sense, right? If you're not just chasing your predispositions and going here and going there, and if you can recall information to mind that is helping you trigger good karma, then better chance of going somewhere good. Okay. Right. That was a lot. How can you know which beings are which? Stuff. Stuff. I've heard, for example, that because sometimes it can be quite difficult to tell which is which, that they have, for example, in Tantra, you'll get in Tantra, what they do is they prepare an area before the empowerment that no other beings can enter except for Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, great beings, Dharma practitioners. And let me give you one sort of spicy detail along these lines that maybe add a little more weight to this, maybe not. So I know a person who got a tantric empowerment, and they were doing it remotely at home with one of their teachers on the other end of the thing, right? And it takes 2 days for the empowerment to take place. One of the things that happens when the teacher is preparing the empowerment is that they basically create, with the help of other beings and celestial bodhisattvas and Buddhas and Dharma protectors and so forth, they create a physical barrier around the area of the empowerment so that other beings who would try to harm the practitioner and so forth can't enter. And anyone who's not supposed to be there, including human beings, should be basically sort of blown out of the space. They should feel like something is really wrong here and I have to leave if they enter that space. And I know one person who was doing an empowerment at home. They had done the first part of the empowerment, and they said that the room felt like a cathedral when you walked in. Sometimes you walk into like really holy Christian cathedrals or really holy Hindu temples or really holy like places where a lot of virtue has taken place, or the relics of certain saints where you walk in and it's like pea soup, like it feels somehow different because those things are there or those practices took place there. That's how it felt in the room to that person. And they said that they invited their wife to come into the room, and she said, "No, this is wrong. I have to leave," and turned right around out of the room and left. And she said, "Is it going to stay like that? Because I can't go in that room again if it's going to stay like that." Pretty interesting, right? She wasn't supposed to be in that space. She wasn't a Dharma practitioner. She wasn't getting the empowerment. So she got blown out of the room. Anyways, so they prepare a space where things that, like the ones we're talking about, couldn't enter. You could still fuck it up yourself, right? At the end. But other beings who would deliberately do it to you and try to mislead you can't get into that space during the empowerment. And then one of the things they do during the empowerment is they give you a name so that if you're in the intermediate state and something appears as your guru who gave you the empowerment, who will know your name, you say, "Tell me my name, tell me my secret tantric name." And if that person can't do that, you know that it's not your guru. You know it's not your actual teacher. And if they can, then you know it's your teacher and you can trust them and follow them. So these are the kind of games that they play with the on the edge of a knife at the end of at the most critical moments of practice. you know, these are the things that people are up to. If you were wondering, uh, I don't know. Does any of that help? Basically, if you do your best, you do your practices, respect your teachers, keep your vows, do some generosity, do your best, even if it's not against your vows, to not hurt other people and all of this, and to help people when you have the chance, even spontaneously. If you see an old lady walking home carrying her groceries and struggling, just say, Miss, I have 5 extra minutes. I have 10 extra minutes. Can I help? Or if you see someone who's doing something difficult or whatever, and they just need someone to stop for 2 minutes and help, just stop and help. Or if you see a situation where you can be of benefit because of what you are as a person, do it. There was a wonderful near-death experience I heard of a young Muslim boy. I think he was 9 or 7 at the time, and he said that the two angels that come down when you die as a Muslim, that they appeared to him, and they showed him his whole life. This is just so fascinating. And they showed him his whole life, and they said, basically, you never did anything good, except one thing. And they took him into his memory, and they showed him one thing that he did, and the thing that he had done was, for some reason, he saw a tree. It was sort of like a little neglected tree on the roadside, and he thought, nobody cares about this tree. Nobody's doing anything to help this tree. If I just gave it a little bit of water, it'd probably live. And so he did. He went and he got some water and he put it on the tree. And it was the only time his entire life he hadn't. There had been absolutely no self-interest in what he did. Every other time there had been self-interest, and it had been a little bit about him, at least. And there was one time in his early years, his 9 years or whatever, where it hadn't been about him. And it was this time where he thought that tree might not make it if someone, and so he went and he got a little water and he put it on the tree. And then when he had this near death experience, he said these angels showed him that. And he said, look, this is the only time it wasn't about you. That's what virtue is. That's what real virtue is. And then when he came back from that experience, of course, my impression was that, of course, he was a more faithful Muslim because of the flavor of the experience, but that he took out of that experience that this aspect, it's not about all the crunchy sort of ethics, the sort of really crunchy ethics stuff. It's about getting your self-interest out of the process. That's the important bit. It's really interesting, right? It's kind of Buddhist. And this is why I say I'm really not sure what's going on with the Deva realms and all this, because quite a few Devas and holy beings, the Buddha was a teacher of gods and human beings. So there are Devas that are Buddha, that are Dharma students. And when I hear something like that, I go, that's really Buddhist. If you were just trying to take rebirth in the upper realms, you wouldn't need really that kind of selfless wish. It might help to have loving kindness like that. But you could do it probably with ethics, generosity, that sort of thing. But it is so much more powerful if you can get your self interest out of the way, which is part of what you're doing with metta, right? Metta is all about others, which, by the way, I don't know if you guys remember this when I was going on and on about metta and why it's not about you. There's no such thing as self love, there's no such thing as self compassion. This is not a thing in Buddhist psychology. We should stop making it a thing. And when you see it, you should go, oh, yeah, that's not it. Let's go to another source. If you find it in a source and it says this, they are fucking with the material. And if you do that, it's no longer meta because now it's about you. And the whole fucking point of meta is it's not about you. You know what is about you? Renunciation. You want to be happy. You need to get your suffering out of the way. We have a name for that. It's renunciation. You want to renounce suffering and the causes of suffering and pursue the actual causes of happiness for yourself. Now, when you start being concerned with other beings, It's not about your pursuit of happiness for you anymore. It's about them. So it's sort of like this young Muslim boy and the angels showing him the one thing you did that was like that was watering that tree. No, you're not included in all beings. All other sentient beings doesn't include you. You already want to be happy for you. You don't need to cultivate a special wish to desire to be happy for yourself. Even people that want to kill themselves want to kill themselves because they think if I can end my life, I won't experience this suffering anymore, i.e., somehow I'm going to be happier if I'm dead. I'll be happier because the suffering I'm feeling won't be there. You have a natural desire to try to be happy and to be free from suffering. You already have this. You don't have to train in it. It's already there. What you need to do is realize what the actual sources of happiness are and what the actual sources of suffering are so that your natural desire for happiness is now redirected towards the actual causes of happiness, the actual causes of suffering, et cetera, and then head down the path. That's for your sake. That's renunciation. That's for you. Metta is entirely 100% aimed at other beings, not at you at all. It has nothing to do with you. It depends, right? Like if you were a Theravada practitioner full on, it doesn't actually have that much to do with other beings, right? You need to gain certain capabilities for yourself on behalf of yourself to attain nirvana for yourself. It will benefit other beings to do that. And you might need to cultivate some goodwill and a little bit of metta, a little bit of compassion to achieve the goal of nirvana. But the main thing is you need to have all these good qualities for you to attain your happiness for yourself. That's the whole point. Now, if you're going down the Mahayana path as a bodhisattva, at some point you transition from just being interested in your own goal for you to being interested in permanent, both temporary and permanent benefit for all beings. And putting your own interest aside actually allows that interest to occur even more quickly because the karmas you're producing for that are even stronger than they would have been otherwise, which is a bit interesting to think about. But it's true. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you have a good heart, Jay. You have a real good heart, and you're kind of a community relationship oriented guy. And yeah, we've talked about that before. That'll serve you really well. I mean, I think it naturally puts you more in line with Mahayana stuff, to be honest, than the Theravada stuff, because the Theravada stuff is mainly at the end of the day aimed at you attaining happiness for you, so that you can get out of suffering forever for you. You can't take anyone with you into abiding nirvana. You can't take anyone with you into parinirvana, where you're abiding in the nature of the subtlest aspect of your mind forever without ever coming back out, according to the Theravada. So this is a path where it ends with you attaining permanent happiness for you, and then you're sort of done. The benefit you've provided to others is that while you were alive, you did what you could to help them, encourage them to do the same thing for themselves. But if once you enter nirvana, that's it, according to the Theravada. Now, according to the Mahayana, you can break the 12 links, so to speak, right? You can break the 12 links, enter into non-abiding nirvana. You still achieve your own aim, but that's one rung on a ladder headed towards full enlightenment. So you're climbing the ladder here's where you could have simply sort of dove off, I suppose, into abiding nirvana and just hung out more, not entirely alone, really, but you're not actually cut off from other beings, but from your subjective perspective, you're abiding in a state where it's perfect for you, but nobody else is appearing in there. If you're here and you've attained non-abiding nirvana, then you just carry on climbing upwards through the force of loving kindness and compassion, which is all about other beings. Why is it all about other beings? Because when you were here and you could have swan dived off into abiding nirvana that was perfect for you, there was nothing left for you to do for you. Do you get it? Do you see what I mean? From here, if you swan dive off into abiding nirvana, you've already accomplished everything that you could possibly accomplish for you. You're done for you. For you, it's perfect now. So the loving kindness and compassion is solely for the sake of others and carrying on climbing the ladder to Buddhahood, where you have perfect abilities, not just for your own sake, but you have perfect capabilities, perfect power, perfect compassion, perfect patience, perfect this and this and this and this to benefit other. That's the sole reason you've done that. It's none of that is for you because you could have had something perfect for you way before that. And in fact, you still have a mental state that's perfect for you in non-abiding nirvana. Yeah. So, this is more the Mahayana idea that I mean, you still have to develop renunciation because renunciation feeds into your loving kindness and compassion, but you're developing renunciation as a Mahayana practitioner. In the context of your Mahayana practice, you're not developing it in order to attain nirvana simply for yourself. You're developing it as something that must be developed on the way to developing great loving kindness and compassion, which is in How to Expand Love, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he does, if I'm not mistaken, teach renunciation as a precursor. Right. Well, speaking of needing to do practice for the sake of other beings, I still have quite a bit of practice to do before I go to bed. And it is now, despite the way that it looks in this room, I'll show you. There we go. It's actually nighttime. It is full on nighttime over here in Scotland. So, good night, farewell, practice hard, and hope to see you again soon. Cheers.